podcast wouldn't do that.
This isn't a podcast. This isn't a podcast. I'm giving you alternate reads here.
Sure.
You just seem mildly
This
bemused.
isn't a podcast. I'm trying to think of my pleasance.
I was gonna do
This isn't a podcast.
the big Loomis speech, but then I realized a thing I should not say, and I'm about to say it is the Blackest podcast.
Right, we're not
The Devil's podcast.
Right.
That's misrepresenting this show. That will disappoint two different audiences.
Right, yeah. Good call. Good call.
This is not the Devil's podcast, in fact.
Well, sometimes it feels that way. Go ahead.
And some people think.
Yes.
Yes. And everyone's entitled to their opinion, but this is, in fact, a podcast called Blank Check with Griffin and David. I'm Griffin.
I'm David. Just starting it off.
Which, yeah, let's just start it off, right? Because I think we have a lot to get to today.
Mm-hmm.
It's a podcast about filmographies. Directors who have massive success early on in their careers and are given a series of blank checks to make whatever crazy passion projects they want. And sometimes those checks clear, and sometimes they bounce baby.
Mm-hmm.
This is a mini-series on the films of John Carpenter.
Yep.
It's called They Podcast because I was overruled.
Yep. Good call by us.
Yeah, I feel good about that choice still to this day. I've read some of the comments when Marie put out the new miniseries artwork.
Yep.
And I thought Podcast from New York was maybe like a good alt that we didn't actually really think of.
I've never pitched that. I pitched Podscape from Newcast.
Right, which was stupid.
Well, no,
Right,
that
we
was
overruled
dumb,
that.
and we
Right.
didn't like that.
I felt
And
pretty vindicated by the comments saying, why isn't this miniseries named Sweaty enough?
Right, but here's the thing. None of them actually said a title. You know, no one. It wasn't like sometimes they're all in on like it should have been called X title.
What was? Do we know what was in the running?
Yeah, we know.
I mean, from you, not from
Podscape from Newcast. Pod Trouble and Little Casta.
See, no, it was
there's
Little
one.
Casty.
There's one that just already is on my mind that makes perfect sense.
What?
In the Pod of Castness.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like that one.
Yeah. Assault on Podcast 13, I feel like was thrown out at one point.
Yep. That was like, yeah, that was another good option. But come on, They Podcast. That's fun. That's good.
Well, they do,
You
do.
We do.
We do.
They podcast now?
Yeah.
and
We podcast now.
I'm happy to be in person with you guys.
In
Yeah.
person.
Yeah.
Person for the first time in 2 years now.
For us,
Yeah.
oh, easily.
Right?
When would the last time
I think
even
the last
be?
time would have just been something at David's apartment.
Right. You were
'Cause
last on the show.
I don't even have a
year
memory
ago,
of being at a studio.
and I think it was probably a year before that. A Spider-Man commentary.
Yeah, at David's house.
Right.
But that's 2019, yeah,
Yeah.
2 years ago.
Yeah.
Pretty much almost to the day.
Yeah.
Oh
boy.
And I gotta say, cat's out of the bag. This is our Halloween episode.
Correct.
Guest is director, filmmaker Alex Ross Perry.
Uh-huh.
Everyone, and I feel triumphant about this.
Yes.
It's like, all right, so what's he doing? Memoirs of an Invisible
Everyone
Man?
assumes
Everyone's right.
Vampires?
You're
Like,
playing your
what's the-
usual game. What's the
Everyone's
least
right.
essential
Everyone's
movie
right.
in a filmography?
They're all right, and I it's a big surprise.
Yes.
You decided to break your streak of trying to pick the most irrelevant
I
film.
should be doing one of those.
Right.
David, how
Village of the Damned, one of those.
It would have been memoirs.
Memoirs,
It was the
yeah.
only one I've never seen
Yeah.
Yes.
at this point. But David,
That's
how,
another thing. You like cold watching.
Yeah,
You do, right.
Especially someone who means a lot. But
Sure.
David, how many minutes after the end of March Madness did I call this episode?
You didn't do it during? Honestly?
I think it was during the final day. I said,
Sure.
if Carpenter wins, I want Halloween.
You were very angry. On one of the March Madness updates, we casually said Carpenter essentially created a genre, and you kind of blew up both of us
Yes.
over
He
the
didn't-
phone.
He didn't blow me up. I
Maybe
gotta
I-
say. This is something that happened to Griffin,
Really?
not me. Yeah, I didn't get blown up.
Maybe I blew up privately. Maybe I blew you up in person.
No, you blew me up over not knowing the movie
Burnt Offerings.
Burnt Offerings. That was
Right.
the one that you were mad at me about, not knowing about that
This
movie.
came up
which
in
is
Oops
fair.
All Box
That's fine.
Office.
Yes.
You guys were reading it.
And maybe he blew you up because you said he invented a genre or whatever. He had separate
Right.
blow-ups at separate times
Here's-
over
here's
70s
blow-ups.
horror.
He
Right.
separated them.
Here are the facts, I
Uh-huh.
think.
Okay.
Two things. One, I was very hurt by my pathetic and embarrassing loss in March Madness. And I wanted to I want to talk about that for exactly 5 minutes.
Okay. Well, we can very briefly talk about that.
And
but
as
I will
that pertains to my wanting this for wanting this episode.
Okay, well, let's put time on the clock.
Just to be clear, at March Madness, we had some friends of the show pick directors.
Right. This is once a year. We let people vote for what miniseries we're going to do. And this year we mixed it up and we had one region where we picked 8 of our favorite recurring guests and let them each pick a director.
And I said to Alex, who do you want? And
I've been lobbying for years that you guys really should consider covering Oliver Stone.
I think we should put 5 minutes on the clock now. I know you're saying you want to say something first, but let's have this count for the 5 minutes.
I've put 5 minutes on the clock.
Okay.
Don't worry. I'm going to cut
clock.
this
No,
off.
we don't need to go over.
I just need to say something. I told you when you said Oliver Stone, I was like, Alex, Oliver Stone is not going to win a single Twitter poll. He's not cool. He's the opposite of what, people on Twitter are interested in. I'm just saying I warned you. I'm like, I understand what you're saying. You were like, what are you talking about? Bulletproof case. Like, that you guys have to cover.
I said anybody who loves this show the way I do will instantly be like, that is 5 months of incredible episodes.
You are
wonderful insights on some of the most important films of American cinema of the 1980s, 1990s, and even a little bit in the 2000s. If you love the show the way I do, you will be like, I have to hear that miniseries. And it turns out most people don't love the show the same way.
Well, I was also just trying. You're not on Twitter, to your credit.
That's the other thing. I was not able to mobilize any fan base because I don't have one.
But beyond that, I was just like, if you take the temperature of sort of Twitter, Oliver Stone, he's peanut butter and pickles. Like, no one's interested.
He's interviewing Putin long form.
Right. He's just not in a place right now where people are fired up about him.
Was really humiliated by this. And I thought it was really sad because we were denied something that could be great. It's not that I wanted him to win. I didn't think that would happen. I wanted him to build enough momentum that at some point he seemed undeniable.
Sneak by maybe
a couple.
Jackie Chan.
I wanted a couple victories. However, I also was very clear that the only thing I actually wanted was a winner from Ben's region.
Mm-hmm.
And the only thing I really wanted was for John Carpenter to win because this is a no-brainer.
Sure. Yeah.
And then I was like, well, if I'm so low from this and I want to be on again, but I also don't want to just be like, well, I tried with a candidate and I lost. So here I am. We're talking about one of his irrelevant films.
Right. You don't want to just be given the Secretary of Transportation in the cabinet.
Right.
Exactly. Right. I said, if this is happening, no one, if somebody wins their candidate, they would probably pick the totemic episode.
And when we did a fair amount of this, of like offering to the people who had not been on in a little while and had other candidates in March Madness, like, you get an early pick. You can pick a big one.
And I wanted the biggest because I knew Ben, maybe he could have said, actually, I just want that episode to be private, no guests.
Well, yeah.
For such a big one.
I mean, we do that sometimes, but I feel like this is just, this director, I mean, Johnny Boy is just so beloved. Johnny Boy. I feel like we wanted to have as many people on for this series as we could. So
yeah, I want to say something to your credit. You raised a good point, not a stink, but a good point after the fact that we should have considered, which is first round matchup. You should have gone up against JD as the two people without Twitter. That perhaps it was unfair to put the two of you up against people who were able to mobilize.
A very brutal weapon just to say to your followers, do me a favor, click on this thing. You don't know what it is, but
this is why we're done with Twitter.
Good. Yeah. So next year you'll put Stone back in, and he'll go the distance because
fine. He
his
can be in there.
dark
God knows what we're going to do.
Was he in our Oscar versus Razzie bracket?
No, you had never had him in. If I looked at all 32, I would have said the only two of these that I really think would be wall to wall great are Stone and Carpenter.
Wow.
Like, these are just the best assortment of episodes, variety of films.
I'll say this: when Jonathan Demme won,
I was wrong.
You're swinging in being like, this is a disaster.
But now
for
I
the
know.
show.
I thought, and I told you this, and this was part of my argument, Stone is the dark Sith to the Demi Jedi. It's the same exact filmography arc, the same highs and lows. And I said he's the same as Zemeckis. It's these kinds of guys. These are great miniseries.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're done talking about it.
I don't disagree
We're done talking
in theory.
I'm going to be so stringent
one final thing
in keeping this focused on the film Halloween.
Sure. That's why I want to say just one final thing.
Which, thanks to my structure, I will not get to for 45 minutes. But then when I do, we're talking about
Alex has come prepared with notes. He's got a notebook. He's got several printed out pieces of paper and things on his phone.
Is what I wrote down while watching the film.
Okay.
The several pages I have printed out here is
the syllabus.
It's my syllabus. I came here to relitigate March Madness.
Yeah.
I came here to school you guys on the history of American horror as a genre from 1968 to 1978 in order to understand the context for what Carpenter did with this film and his subsequent career.
Right.
And chew bubblegum. And I'm all out of bubblegum.
Those are the three things.
I'm all out of relitigation.
Okay.
But anyway, fans have demanded John Carpenter, and they're right.
Mm-hmm.
And John Carpenter is a hero and an absolute titan of cinema.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the finest filmmakers of the second half of the 20th century, no question, I think. But in order to understand him, I think there's a lot, and when I say a lot, I mean a lot, of context that you need to understand.
Okay.
Leading up to the film Halloween, which we will be talking about in, as I told David last week, excruciating detail.
This is, I feel like, truly in every way the least work I have done for an episode in as long as I can remember. In that even rewatching this movie, I was barely trying to formulate thoughts because I was like, Alex is going to do whatever Alex is going to do. Our hands are off the wheel on this one, you know?
Yes.
I'm basically just prepared for you to guide us through this.
I love listening to your show, and I love talking to you guys as friends. But it has come up many times that horror is a humongous blind spot. Self-admitted in some cases.
Sure.
But David really still remembers how brutally I raked him over the coals for on the Oops All box office episode. You guys chortling and saying there's burnt offerings. Like, is this a real movie? Oliver Reed is in this. And I was like, David, this is a beloved film that you and we all share the same we all have the same DNA of nerdery, right? We're all trivia veterans. We could all sit at trivia and basically hit the same rounds. Sure. But then within these subsections of nerdery, there are these other things that one person knows everything about and one person knows nothing about. And that's kind of the beauty of people that have essentially the same interest, but the interests diverge. And it also comes up a lot where I feel like David, you were saying last year, you spent a lot of time familiarizing yourself with a lot of the horror franchises that you had said you had not seen.
Fun projects. Well, I'd seen some, but I'd never seen every entry, and
you
it was
made
fun
it an
to
effort
make it a
to
project.
go through the totemic franchises
the
because these were
American
blind
boys.
spots, and you wanted them filled in. And Ben, you're obviously a big. You're a big horror guy, more so.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just because you're from scumbag country like I am.
Yep,
Pennsylvania,
absolutely.
New Jersey, people like to wear cutoff shorts and sleeveless shirts and wear horror and get weird.
And drink a ton of soda, which is what we were talking about before we started this episode.
Be kind of raw. And I just felt like if I could...
Hellraiser's like a hero of mine.
Yeah, Pinhead. He's a close personal friend. Pinhead.
Absolutely, yeah. We're pen pals, but not in the way you think.
You're
we
kind
send
of
each
like-
other
you're-
nails.
I've seen Hellraiser many times, but I've never seen a Hellraiser sequel.
Okay, see, that's a big problem.
That's this is what I'm talking about, where it's like there's only...
Right.
Ben, have you
There's
seen
so
the third
many
Hellraiser?
avenues.
The third Hellraiser is the cyberpunk Hellraiser.
So this is
Hell
actually
on Earth.
This
I
is the
believe.
one with CD.
Yes, the
right?
one with flying CDs.
See, this is like such a good reminder. I have to see this.
I can't. Cyberpunk Hellraiser is a real Ben phrase, but
man,
Ben's kind of like the Renfield to the Cenobites, where they're like kind of making you pay your dues, and then they'll potentially welcome you into the Cenobite army.
I'm aware of the CD Hellraiser. In that
When we
sort of
watched the Hellraiser
osmosis
franchise,
I talked to you about...
Right.
I
the
That's
first
what I'm saying.
Hellraiser.
He comes up.
The first Hellraiser is a masterpiece. I love
It is.
Hellraiser.
It's wonderful.
And then
rules.
a couple of Halloweens ago at home, me and my wife Anna, I said, let's watch Hellraiser 2. She said, this is pretty good. And we watched Hellraiser 3. And she said, this is the last Hellraiser I'm watching. I'm finished with Hellraiser.
She was out. She didn't make it a bloodline.
And keeping him, we're going to get to talking about horror sequels, but we're not going to talk about Hellraiser because it comes
That's
after
post.
Halloween.
Can I just ask? Do
Yeah.
they stop being theatrical after 3?
No, I think
Bloodline is the last one.
4 is
the last. But then isn't there... There's like a guy who came on board for the direct-to-video ones that made a couple that are well liked.
There
right?
are. I haven't gotten into those.
I know, and this is the whole thing about horror. Is if we're talking about this, is it's so dense because these movies can be made so cheaply that there's so many, and I get over. It's like anime. Well, not that I've seen a lot more horror than I've seen anime, but where I'm like, oh god, I can't. Like, there's too. I'm just digging and finding more things, and I'm getting overwhelmed.
Yes, but the thing is, horror fans will see everything. It is a monolithic genre. Like, you can, if it's your thing, you can see everything. And if you look at horror fans or you talk to them, it's like this bullshit Netflix horror movie, I watched it. Straight to Shudder horror movie, I watched it. New direct-to-video Amityville movie, I watched it. And that's the relationship that horror fans have with the genre. And I feel like coming on, this is the third Carpenter film, before any of his other horror films, and I feel like coming on to kind of talk about what the genre was when he changed it forever with this film. And what he brought to it, to contextualize his innovations as a filmmaker, a director of the camera, really, and his use of music and writing is just so essential, not just to Halloween, but to the rest of the Carpenter miniseries.
Can I just say, just to sort of like frame my blind spots?
Yes. I'm going to say we're starting in 1968.
Okay, because this is just all I want to say is that, like, certainly is not my genre of strength, right? In terms of movie knowledge to begin with. But also I feel like in high school I went through this period where I was just like, homework's irrelevant. I'm just going to watch movies all the time.
Definitely.
Which worked out really, really well.
Homework is irrelevant. Yeah, homework sucks.
Yeah, fucking homework is the worst.
It's for losers.
It's pretty bad.
It's for losers and babies. And so I was very much like systematically going through blind spots in sort of what I perceived as a 15-year-old of like my film knowledge and stuff, right? So a lot of that was sort of what David was saying of like, oh, I need to watch the first movie of every franchise. So I kind of like did that and then would move on because I was trying to cover as many of the icons as possible without going deep into them. Freddy and Chucky are the two guys I went deep on. Unsurprisingly, they reflect the two sides of my personality.
Bad boys and stinkers.
Right.
When also Freddy has so much practical effects and sort of fantasy elements, very Griffey stuff.
Well, and it's essentially a comedian and a toy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Beyond that, my horror preferences just in terms of aesthetics and vibe or whatever, not that I position myself as being expert, is like pre-1960.
Okay.
Like German expressionist horror
like
stuff,
the
Universal
Universals,
Monsters,
right.
Even sort of like Vincent Price, early Vincent Price, Roger Corman or
This
whatever.
fucking guy.
Ben's giving
I'm
you
not saying this in pretension.
No, but there's I have a transition from that, which is very...
That's all I just want to
Okay,
say.
now I'm glad you mentioned 1960, because the first thing you have to mention is Psycho,
Of course.
which is the first movie of its kind that Halloween is a movie of its kind. There is nothing before Psycho that is like that. That is like, the premise of this movie is somebody picks up a knife and they use it
What
to
if
kill
there
people.
was a guy who killed people?
They use the knife repeatedly to stab people through their body, and then the person is dead, and then they go to another.
But wait,
One could
isn't
even
there that
say-
German expressionist movie M?
Yeah,
the guy
He's
that's
different.
kidnapper.
M is different.
He's
Yeah,
okay.
he's
Psycho is, what if there was a psycho?
Yeah.
I mean, it is.
Sure.
And M is less of a horror movie, is more framed around trying to catch this guy.
Yeah.
Okay,
yeah.
okay.
It's a little more
He's
targeted.
like,
we really
yeah.
jumped down Ben's throat to correct him about what M is
Listen
about.
up,
no,
Ben,
hey,
listen
no,
up, Ben.
no.
We'll
It's
do
good,
some
it's good.
M-splaining.
look,
Yeah.
But Psycho 1960, yes, that is obviously a huge thing. Anna, also, when I was telling her about my thesis I was going to present, said make sure you mention Peeping Tom, which is 61.
Great. Isn't it later? Maybe not. Let me look it up. No, it's 60. It's also
Okay.
60.
So those two movies, 1960, are kind of two sides of the coin, opposite sides of the ocean.
And Psycho is beloved, gets
Yes.
Oscar nominations, is a huge hit. Peeping Tom essentially ruins a career.
But it's Peeping Tom, much like Psycho, is a very pathological movie, but Psycho is a slasher at its heart, whereas I think Peeping Tom is like a very psychological...
That's
Yes.
not really a horror
and it's very
movie.
meta.
Right. Yes.
It has these kind of murderous elements.
It implicates the audience.
It disturbed people and it was like prurient. Whereas
Yeah.
like Psycho is like a roller coaster.
Yes.
And
I've
it's
never
great.
seen Peeping Tom.
Oh,
You
Ben.
love it, Ben. You're the
I mean,
vapor.
I know.
Can we
I
tell
gotta
you
check
what
it
the
out.
basic premise of this movie is?
Please.
It's a guy who's obsessed with the look on people's faces when they know they're about to die. He's a cameraman, and he builds a blade into one of the legs of his tripod, and he like films women thinking that they're doing like screen tests, and he stabs them on camera.
Oh my
that
god.
movie could be remade
Wow.
about a podcaster now.
Absolutely.
Anyway, you're going to hear me say anyway a lot while we're going through this. Anyway. Okay. Here's one of the most important things about Halloween that people who come to it always talk about, always know. Halloween, independent movie.
Yes.
Very successful independent movie. Horror then becomes, for many years, something that is largely independent or very low budget studio movies. But in order to understand how revolutionary it is that in 1978 there was an independent horror movie that became such a mainstream hit, I just want to very briefly talk about studio horror movies from 1968 to 1978, because everything you're saying, your Val Lewton movies, your Universal Monsters, horror was a studio thing.
Right.
And it was a classy studio thing.
And you're not going to talk, why 68?
Two things happened in 1968. Also, it gives us a clean decade.
Sure.
Two things happened in 1968. There are two big bangs. Studio Big Bang 1968 is Rosemary's Baby.
Sure.
There had not been a studio horror movie like Rosemary's Baby for years. Rosemary's Baby is produced by William Castle, who was a purveyor of schlocky horror, cheap thrills throughout the 60s, such as you're saying you might gravitate more towards.
The Tingler.
Mr. Sardonicus,
yes.
Prowler, 13 Ghosts.
Yep.
So
my kind of stuff.
So
a lot of the names.
Oh yeah.
Watch out.
Well, what if there was a Tingler?
But then there's
There was
also
a Blob.
there's The Haunting, which is like a pretty Tony studio movie. It's also rules.
There's lots of ghost movies.
Right.
Ghost
stories.
Haunted House. And we'll get to the divergent, why it's so revolutionary to have a movie about a guy with a knife.
Yes. Right.
But Rosemary's Baby kind of progresses. You're right. I've written down here 1958, House on Haunted Hill, and The Tingler. Those are William Castle movies, very gimmicky.
Another thing I just think worth mentioning very briefly is that in earlier decades, you would go to the movies and you would see a bill of shit. And B movies were literally the backup movie, and people would see horror films. They were the lesser films that were like the added value behind whatever the prestige movie were. And by the 60s and 70s, people are going mostly to see one movie.
So you no longer have 60-minute Boris Karloff movies about a guy who opens a sarcophagus.
Right. But there's always a market to be making these movies for cheap because they need something to play after.
But to me, a crucial, we're not going into this, but a crucial 60s figure is Herschel Gordon Lewis.
Right.
Who made
Master of Gore.
Yes, totally violent, cheap, low-budget, independent movies throughout the 60s. It's not mainstream, therefore it doesn't really factor into this conversation, but I'm not going to not mention
Godfather of Gore.
The Godfather of Gore.
I'm sorry.
As the name of his documentary, I believe.
I've only seen like
2000 Maniacs, Wizard of Gore is my favorite.
I've seen Wizard of Gore.
Blood Feast, which is an Egyptian-themed thing.
Right.
I believe it was a sarcophagus in that. Color Me Blood Red, The Gruesome Twosome, The Gore Girls. All of his movies are terrific.
Sure.
But it's pure exploitation. I'm not talking about exploitation. Studio horror movies, because exploitation always exists parallel. It exists throughout the 60s. But Rosemary's Baby is such a huge hit.
When you said that there hadn't been a film like Rosemary's Baby for years, are you saying that essentially there's like a space between Psycho and Rosemary that's not filled in?
Essentially,
by
yes.
the studios?
In terms of Psycho Universal, Rosemary's Baby Paramount.
Right.
The studios are not saying what A-list top-shelf directors could make a horror movie that we are going to take very seriously and will end up with Oscar nominations.
Right.
That's not a thing.
Obviously, based on a book. It's this very bougie movie about being middle class and buying an apartment and having children.
Very specific milieu. And we're going to, I'll come back to that in a minute, but I just want to quickly run down. After that movie, there is, up into Halloween, something of a boom of studios making horror films.
Sure, because it's a huge thing.
It's a huge hit. And of
Jump
course,
on the trend, right.
People try to copy this. There's not a ton of them, but there are a handful. I'm going to run them down. And these are in order. I put these in order.
Okay.
And weirdly, the first one of these is the only one that functions as basically an independent film, but it is a Paramount film, which is 1971, Let's Scare Jessica to Death, which is a film I love. I feel like it's a film people who see it love it.
Yeah, one of the all-time great titles.
Yes,
too.
a great title.
It's also it's got that great tagline. Now I've got something is after Jessica. Something very cold, very wet, and very dead.
Hey.
Yes,
and literally,
it's a great film.
Perked his head up.
But it is weird that that's kind of in my, again, there are gaps in my research, but that is kind of the first, like, it's a big studio movie. It's a Paramount movie, but it's just like this. It could also have just been a Halloween, an Embassy Pictures.
It was
release.
a Paramount movie, but it was like a rounding error for Paramount.
Basically.
Right.
cheap little movie. Yep.
1971 is a great movie that Fox makes called The Mephisto Waltz, which is Alan Alda playing a pianist. It is scene for scene the same as Rosemary's Baby.
I know nothing of this, but it sounds like
It's really good.
An occult kind of movie again.
We watched this a couple years ago, and it's like, oh, well, this is 3 years after Rosemary's Baby, and they were like, so in Rosemary's Baby, John Cassavetes is an actor. In this movie, we should make Alan Alda a pianist.
It's the Mephisto Waltz?
Mephisto Waltz. And he sells his soul to the devil to become a better pianist.
Sure.
It's actually really good.
Yeah.
It's really fun. Alan Alda, pretty good in a horror movie context.
Directed
this
by
dang
Paul,
devil coming for my soul.
Paul Wendkos. That's his name. I don't know.
Good movie. Just wanted to mention it. The next big one, 1973. It's a big movie. It's The Exorcist.
Big one. One of the most successful films ever made.
A hit.
We're going to come back to it, but I just want to say at this point, worldwide, 597 million adjusted. Yep. Warner Brothers, 10 Oscar nominations.
Right. It's one of the 5 highest grossing movies of all
Beyond that,
time.
though, also, the book was one of those books. I was not alive at the time, but I feel like it was one of those books that was on every coffee table. It was like a blockbuster book, too. Again, like the book often helps here, right? If you're adapting from a best-selling novel. Have you ever, the cover of The Exorcist is like famous for
every
scaring young children.
Sure.
Exactly. Yeah.
I would stay at it. Would be.
I just decided this Halloween I'm going to reread The Exorcist and read Legion.
Read Legion. Are you going to watch Exorcist 3 or?
I've seen Exorcist 3.
I know. I'm saying, are you going to? You like to do a rewatch marathon sometimes themed.
I haven't watched The Exorcist in
every
years.
July 4th. You text me about whatever like political thriller made the cut this year or whatever.
Yes,
right?
thrillers.
Yeah.
Well, here's the
Did
thing
you
with
watch the
Exorcist,
package yet?
Not yet. I'm gonna.
We can't get into it, but there's a great movie on HBO called, or maybe it's on Amazon now, The Package, with Gene Hackman and Tommy Lee Jones.
Sounds good.
Cold War thriller.
Yeah.
It's just such a David movie.
Yeah.
Anyway, The Exorcist, 1973, huge hit. Weirdly, this I was actually surprised by. 1973, Don't Look Now, not a studio film. I thought that this was
like an art film.
Right.
It is, but I thought MGM made it. But I think that's just because I'm picturing the old DVD.
They had the home video rights for a while.
No, it's whatever. It's like a British.
So it
Italian.
bears mentioning, but it kind of exists outside. Now, weirdly, by this time,
Also classy, also based on.
so that's the thing, is
Daphne
that a lot of
du Maurier,
these are quite classy. And
A-list stars.
Yeah.
A-list stars,
these
but also
movies-
has fucking.
this genre,
Got some fucking in it.
this genre now in my chronology, only 5 years away from Halloween, is very A-list. You're bringing in a lot of big actors.
Tony.
And then there's just a few more. But even at this point, I found it interesting that De Palma has not really gone horror yet.
Yeah.
No, he's
Sisters
still doing.
is 1972.
Right.
And
That's horror.
Yes.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
Carrie is 1976. But then those are the only horror movies he's made.
Because
around
Phantom
this
of the
time.
Paradise doesn't really count
No.
as horror. I mean, obviously it's sort of horror,
No.
nodding to it.
No,
or,
but he is not
spoofing
yet a
it.
horror filmmaker.
Right.
Carrie's United Artists, so that's a studio movie. And
But
then
again,
yes,
based on a book.
as you mentioned, star driven. Now, but these ones, some of these aren't quite horror, and some of these are going to come up again in a minute.
Okay.
But just the rest of this list now from 74 to 78, studio horror.
Where it's starting to ramp up a little.
A little bit.
Yeah. Okay.
It's Alive, 1974, Warner Brothers, Larry Cohen's movie, Evil Baby. Stepford Wives, 1975, Columbia. Rosemary's Baby Connection. Ira Levin or Lewin?
Yeah.
Ira 11.
Ira Levin.
Yeah.
So again, Stepford Wives, kind of horror, kind of satire.
Yeah.
But that's a Columbia movie, kind of a hit. 1976, The Omen, Fox. Huge hit. Coming back to that in a minute.
Yeah.
1976, Burn Offerings, United Artists distributed. Great movie. Amityville Horror before Amityville Horror.
David's avoiding eye contact. He does
People
not want to
moving-
face the wrath.
People moving into a house that is evil. Totally good movie.
But Amityville Horror, so Burn Offerings is 76. The Amityville Horror book comes out 77.
So the true story is maybe.
Yeah, of course, the true story book that definitely happened. The movie is when
79. And we're coming.
Okay.
I know that's just after Halloween,
Right.
but I have to mention it in a minute. The rest of these, 77, Audrey Rose. Don't know if you've ever seen that. It's a
Don't know
good
that
little
movie.
creepy girl movie. I think there's a ghost. I think it has a ghost element. I've
There's
only
also
seen
been
one.
a shift, though. Even
These
just
are all
as-
UA.
That's Robert Wise.
But
as well,
I
yeah.
feel like these 8 years you've covered, right? It's starting out with like, oh, it's proven directors, international art house auteurs, this and that.
and often based on a bestseller.
We're
Right.
making classy films that
Right.
can, as you said, be sold as a single feature.
Right.
Demon Seed, 1977, USA.
Yeah.
Julie Christie,
Yeah.
sort of evil technology movie. Ben, Demon Seed,
Never seen it.
evil technology.
Cool.
What if the
What if,
computer?
what if you gave your house to a
knocked
computer
you
and the
up?
computer tried to make you pregnant?
Yeah. And what if a witch hacked that computer?
77 is also The Sentinel, which is Universal,
Mm-hmm.
which I feel like is a movie that people have come back around to. But these are the kinds of movies that start to just have tons of stars from
Right.
like the 40s,
The Sentinel is a Michael Winner movie, and
Yes.
if you grew up in Britain,
which no one here did.
which
so.
I did,
Irrelevant. What?
you know Michael Winner. Obviously, he directed Death Wish as well, and he.
You grew up. Sorry.
Wait. Is the new shock that I grew up?
Yeah. I thought you were just a big kid now.
I am a big kid
He's
now.
like a very big boy.
Michael Winner became a guy who would he was like a pitch man. It was weird.
Well, what
The
was his
director?
what
Yeah,
was
he
his
became
column?
this,
What
like,
was his
raconteur.
column called? Don't look it up. Don't look it up.
I don't know what it was called. You have to tell me.
Okay, Michael Winner. Don't look it up.
Winner Takes It All?
No, Michael Winner wrote a column for 1,000 columns, I
Winner
think.
Circle?
About restaurant reviews.
Yes.
What was his column called? Griffin says, where does your brain go?
Winner's Dinner.
Winner's Dinners.
Right. He became this guy who would like wear a cravat and say Britain used to be better before, and he would tail off, and you were supposed to read into what he was talking about. And you were like, aren't you the guy who made these like trashy ass movies in the 70s?
So bizarre.
Anyway,
He's an odd figure. Anyway, The Sentinel, I think, is that set in Brooklyn, right? That's like a Brooklyn Heights movie.
The Sentinel is indeed set in Brooklyn Heights.
Yeah, it's a great movie. 1978.
Chris Sarandon, Martin Balsam. Yeah.
But it's got the Sentinel has like a cast of. I'm not mistaken that there are like
Ava Gardner's
right.
in it.
There are like golden age actors.
Burgess
in it.
Meredith.
Yeah, you know, if they made a Brooklyn Heights horror movie today, it'd be about the coffee shop running out of oat milk. Brooklyn Heights horror movie. What's the terror here? Oat milk.
Nobody knew how to respond to that.
Yeah, he took a shot.
I have two more
Hey,
things. I'm
shoot
gonna
your
mention.
shot. That's what they say now.
And we admire you for that.
Thank
Two
you.
more of these movies: The Legacy, 1978, Universal. Sam Elliott and Catherine Ross.
Yeah.
Is
that where they meet?
Yes.
Fuck.
This is a very sexy movie and a good horror movie.
Excuse me. Also, the poster is a cat divided by, and then there's smoke underneath the cat, and then there's an evil hand coming out of the bottom of the cat.
It's a great poster. We have
It's crazy. What is this?
I don't know. Could use a little more Sam Elliott on the poster.
It's a sort of like isolated, like they're in a little bit of an
And
isolated.
it's Richard Marquand, director of Return of the Jedi.
It's just before that. It's a pretty solid movie. And then 1978, the final one on this list, Invasion of the Body Snatchers, United Artists.
Oh,
Great movie.
Yes. These are
I
kind
have
of
seen most of these films, just to be.
It's also interesting.
like
A lot of
two-thirds.
these are repeating the same stars. Like you have two
Yes.
Christie movies, you have two Sutherland movies. Like there are high class actors who are dipping their toe into horror and staying there.
Yes. Now, that is kind of the extent of mainstream studio horror filmmaking between Rosemary's Baby and the release of Halloween.
Right.
So you understand with the list I just read, and we described most of those movies, just how different Halloween.
Right. Nothing that we just talked about is any
There is
Halloween.
nothing even. A lot of these are supernatural. A lot of these are vaguely sci-fi adjacent, and then there's one other element that unites these that we're going to talk about in a minute.
And they tend to be a little more psychological paranoia based.
They also largely take place in very, as David said, very moneyed, very high-class situations. None of these are about children.
No,
These are almost exclusively about adults.
Because I imagine part of the calculation, partly it's that they're based on these books that are often about, but like it's like we're gonna need a Gregory Peck or whoever, right? Like we're gonna need a big serious star to ground this thing.
But a lot of them are also about sort of like the threat to the family unit.
Yeah,
like someone who has made a proper
100%.
life for
You
themselves.
know, a lot of them are set. I mean, obviously, The Exorcist is DC.
Well, okay,
is
so here's four of those.
The Omen.
Okay,
Yes,
four.
we're gonna talk about the Mount Rushmore because you're absolutely right. Here's the Mount Rushmore of the four. And again, one of these is just after Halloween. But the whole point of this is trying to contextualize when Halloween comes out, how could this movie be such a big deal? How could it go so far against the current of the genre? So the four movies, Mount Rushmore, right? Rosemary's Baby,
Sure, that's George Washington.
The Exorcist,
Okay, that's Abraham Lincoln.
The Omen,
Okay, that's Teddy Roosevelt.
Amityville Horror,
For some reason, that's Jefferson. I don't know
79.
why.
Yeah, sure.
right.
Now, what's the one thing all four of these movies have in common?
Okay, so sorry, just to go through it again, it's Rosemary, Exorcist, Amityville Horror, and The Omen
Yes.
are the four.
These are the four most successful horror movies of, I know Amityville is 1 year after Halloween, but of this decade.
They're all about having children to some extent. Being a parent.
Yeah, well, they are. Yeah,
That's true. Apart from
But
Amityville, but even Amityville
what is the
is
main
It's about
threat in these
these
movies?
kids.
Ben, you know who I'm talking about. You love this guy.
Wait, what?
The main threat in those four movies.
Oh, it's the
Satan.
devil.
Satan
yeah, of
himself.
course.
Yes.
The Dark Prince.
Whose podcast? Yeah,
of hell.
This is
The
Satan-
darkest podcast.
The darkest podcast.
Right.
The four biggest, most successful movies
They're
of
demonic.
this decade. They all are literally about Satan or the
Rosemary's
devil.
Baby. What if Satan fucked your wife and made a baby?
And you
The
let
Omen.
it happen. What if you, Bubba the Love
The Omen-
sponged your wife to Satan?
The Omen, what if your kid was the devil?
Yes.
Right.
The Exorcist, what if your kid got infected with the devil?
Right.
Now, the
Amityville, what if you moved into the
horror
devil's pied-à-terre?
Is, I guess, the least demonic,
It
but
is,
it's more of a haunting.
But it's also, for God's sake, get out.
For God's sake, get out.
Right.
But the
And
point
there's
is,
there's a demon pig.
it deals with the sort of religious sense
Sure.
of demonic horror.
I would say also undisputably the trashiest.
Well, I know you don't like Amityville,
I don't hate it. I just feel like it is the one.
and I'm going to explain to you why you think that
okay.
in a minute.
Because
because
it's getting right in
Amityville-
my head.
There was some episode where you were like, Amityville, that movie's pretty bad, and Anna we were like in the car listening to it, and Anna was like,
and you hit brake, and there was like a 28-car
Anna,
pile up.
I think she. I mean, these
Stand
are
Up
all
Blues Brothers.
these are all films we love, but she loves Amityville, and
Sure.
she just went, "Oh, come on!"
Wow.
because
I'm
it
so
is.
sorry.
Well, you should rewatch it. It's quite strong. I also recommend visiting.
I
the
should
house.
rewatch it. I should revisit what?
I also recommend visiting the Amityville house.
Over in Amityville.
Right there in
Long Island.
Amityville.
Yeah.
But anyway, okay, so here's the success of these 4 movies, just to contextualize how much satanic evil people were eating up for this 10 years. Rosemary's Baby, 2 Oscar nominations, 249 adjusted gross.
It wins.
It won
Supporting
Best
actress.
Supporting
Actress.
Actress.
Right.
Should have
Exorcist.
been nominated for more things.
As I already said, 597 million
10
adjusted,
noms.
10 Oscar nominations.
It gets a screenplay win, right? I think it's
Does
only. Yeah, let me look it up.
because Burstyn doesn't win.
Burstyn
had
doesn't
already
win.
won at that point?
No, she wins the next year for
Okay,
Alice, right?
okay, right.
But one
Friedkin had
screenplay
won
and
previously.
sound.
Yes,
Okay.
which is fair.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a great year, but
The Exorcist is just an insane outlier of success. But it
Well,
makes
it's-
people comfortable with horror, the devil, Satanism, and religious horror.
Well, that's
It's
what I was going to
also-
say. That's what's weird about The Exorcist is that it's almost kind of popular with Christians
Right.
who wouldn't normally be into that kind
They're
of
into
Especially
it,
because
but
it's
it's also so
grotesque
scary to them,
and
right.
explicit. That's the thing. Like, you're pushing boundaries with The Exorcist
the
that I feel like we're
language,
beyond
the gore, the language,
Right.
like
Good
coming out of a
taste
girl's mouth, right?
at that
It's
point in
insane.
time.
Great
Yes.
film. Great
It
film.
is. It's
Okay.
the best.
The,
It's so fucking good.
the Omen.
I love it
so
so much.
scary.
It's great.
It's my favorite horror franchise,
And it's one of those
the one
things
I
like
want to do the
Friedkin
most.
he's fucked it up so bad now. Like,
Oh sure. Wait.
I feel like a couple years ago he screened like a Atmos mix DCP, and I know people who saw it and they were like, "It's fucking trash."
Sure.
Like what he has done to this.
I didn't.
He
is-
also did his recoloration of French Connection,
Yeah,
where he made it look like Inside Llewyn Davis, and he was like, "It was always supposed to look like
It's-
runny
he's-
pastel."
yeah.
I
Well,
mean,
I liked when he added the going
The spider
down
walk.
the
Yeah,
stairs.
like
the version,
that. That's fine.
the
Yeah,
version
as a
you've
kid.
never seen was solid.
was solid, although I still don't prefer it.
No, I
personally.
wouldn't put it on now.
No.
Anyway,
But and then also he made the Demented documentary where he talked to like the real exorcist, who's like this 1 million-year-old Italian guy who's like, "Yes, Harry Potter is the devil," and you're like, "What is this movie?"
Yeah, you just also
Missed
want to
that one.
constantly like scream at Friedkin like, "You're Jewish. You're allowed to be interested in this, but just acknowledge it."
He has the vibe of like, anyway, he doesn't want to,
Love that.
That's what I'm saying.
Right,
I just
yeah,
want to
yeah, yeah.
remind him.
Right.
and also Friedkin's The Keep is The Guardian. Just
Oh,
putting that
sure.
out there.
Well, look,
Friedkin's Tree
Friedkin is
movie.
the original blank check arc guy, in my opinion. You know, he bankrupts
You've
the
argued
studio
this for a
practically.
while.
You know,
You'll
like,
do him.
He'd be fun.
I'll come
I-
on for The Guardian. I'll go back to my usual lane for that.
Sure.
Okay, The Omen, 277 million
Huge hit.
adjusted, 2 Oscar nominations.
And also, like,
Jerry Goldsmith.
you know, has a song that's like, no, no, no.
Yes.
That was like a charter. Like, it was like on the Billboard charts. What's it called? Ave Santani, right?
like, but The Omen is. We watched The Omen last Halloween. The Omen is so good. But again, like
I haven't seen the Omen in a long time.
what you have
it's a
now
lot of fun.
is like a stately apartment building, a Washington D.C. like a very like nice middle class house,
Right.
an ambassador's home, and then Amityville Horror, 311 million adjusted. This is not a studio film; it's AIP. 1 Oscar nomination, Lalo Schifrin. But again, these are like that's a big family's house. The Omen is a big family's house. The Exorcist is like a modest family's house. So again, like Halloween is not like these 4 huge movies in any way. Now I feel like the context for what American horror is in 1978, I think is pretty clear.
Right.
But then there's this other parallel thing. Now Halloween, indisputably, probably the first massively influential slasher.
Mainstreams the slasher, sure.
Yes, it mainstreams the slasher. But here's a quick list of other slashers, again, from this era. Carnival of Blood, 1970. Great film.
I've never seen. I've heard of it. Great title,
Yes.
obviously. I mean,
Silent
hard
Night,
to argue
Bloody
with
Night,
that.
1972, which is really early. And this is a very straight down the middle slasher. It's also just so lurid and sick and like not at all comfortable. It's a Christmas horror movie. Last House on the Left, 1972.
Does that count as a slasher?
No, it's in there.
It's so scary.
Obviously,
Well, that movie is very disturbing.
Obviously, if
my
you're talking
God.
rape revenge,
Right. I think of that as a rape
And it is
revenge. And of course,
a
it's a remake of an
Virgin
Ingmar
Spring.
Bergman movie. Right.
but nevertheless, you can't not mention that as the sort of Wes
Just
Craven.
in terms of also a movie that is being presented to audiences is like, do you dare
Right.
experience this?
Right. Absolutely. But
You're
also
going to faint. You're
kind
going
of
to
a
vomit.
you know, 72 is early for that. Like
It
that
is. I mean, that movie is so distressing because it doesn't feel like Hollywood has even touched it at all.
That's
right?
the other thing,
Yeah.
is that what I'm trying to
It's
now
too real.
establish is that we talked about these 4 huge Oscar-nominated mainstream hits, and then
Yeah.
there's throughout all of this concurrent genre trajectory of these other films that are so gross and
Right.
violent and dirty and nasty.
And this is pre-video, so it's like you have to go to a theater and have this sort of
Yes.
crazy experience.
And these movies
And-
play for
right.
2 years.
Right.
and like
right.
William Castle movies were like selling this like people are gonna fucking faint, you won't
Right.
believe it, and then you watch the movie.
There's a
and it's
nurse.
like,
There's a nurse
And
in
it's
the
like a
lobby.
spider dangling.
right, exactly. That was, right, they were all about the sort of like carnival barker theatrics of like people are losing their minds.
You
blood is
have to
pouring
sign
out
a
there.
waiver to get into the theater.
We have a doctor conducting evaluations.
Did you
Just-
did
just
you
to
see
be
when
clear.
Film Forum did the William Castle series like 10 years ago when
Yes.
they did all the
remember that.
gimmicks?
Yes, it was
with
so
the
good.
skeleton flying over the
Yes.
audience, and you signed. It was a blast.
We are not exaggerating here. This was part of his genius. Was like he would hire actors to be nurses outside with stretchers, and they'd be like, "This last screening was a rough one. People are signing waivers. There's
And one
things
day
floating in the theater."
We'll
But
do
what-
matinee. We'll do Joe Dante.
Yeah,
one
Matinee.
day.
Fucking love
Matinee,
The
big,
Joe Dante, John
homage
Goodman movie
to
is
William
just like
Castle.
incredible.
1-to-1 a William Castle tribute.
But yes, that's the whole phenomenon, and people are buying into it. But in terms of what's actually being depicted on screen, versus when you get to things like Last House on the Left, where it's like we're not
rattling.
fucking around here. You're gonna see shit that's gonna upset.
Right, it's
you.
like this movie looks like it looks kind of like a documentary
Right,
because
that's the
there's
thing.
no production value.
Right.
It's 10 minutes of someone being raped and
It's no
70
actors you
minutes of
recognize.
people
Right.
avenging that rape.
Right.
But
And-
like quietly, and the music is just kind of like this weird occasional jangle, and
Yeah.
you're just it's so
can't look
creepy.
away.
Yes.
It's when these films start to feel a little like snuff
Yes,
films
very,
versus
and
something
they're-
like
they're
Exorcist that's
nasty.
pushing
They're
the
illicit.
limit. But yes.
They're dangerous, and this is where Halloween. This is the paving. Like, this is where Halloween can land in a few years. 74, Black Christmas,
big boy.
huge influential film. Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Deranged, which is also based on Ed Gein, as Texas Chainsaw Massacre is. It's by far the most disgusting version of the Ed Gein story. I love Deranged. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, top 10 film all time for me.
Obviously the best.
Yes, it is. It is just the one for me. But again, like, and we'll talk about this in terms of the slasher and Halloween, but like Texas Chainsaw Massacre takes place nowhere. You don't need to be afraid of that happening to you unless you happen to be.
Texas
I don't
Chainsaw
know.
Massacre, you are definitely like, why don't these kids maybe
Right.
hang a left and hit the
There's
highway?
that turn back.
If your
you
car
idiots
breaks down
kind
in the middle of
right.
nowhere, you're in danger. This does not bring the threat into your home, which is one of the things I
that's
want to start mentioning.
so perfect
Halloween
about Halloween.
does that. None of these movies do that. Black Christmas kind of, but again, like
No, but Black Christmas is a weird ass movie. I mean, it rules.
it's very solid.
But it's set obviously in a sorority house, and you don't know who the killer is at all.
No, not
and
even
you
at the
never
end.
understand any iota of the killer's
It's not
motivation.
about a killer. It's about people who are being picked off.
Right. And I mean, again, it's very atmospheric, but it almost feels like someone's just kind of telling you a creepy story.
Yes, it's much more of a fable.
Right.
In like the sort, it's like an urban legend, is what I mean.
Right, like
the final two I want to mention: Shivers, Cronenberg. You have to just acknowledge that he's starting to do things at this time that are incredibly valuable to the genre.
Shivers is the one that's set in the high rise.
Yes.
Yes.
And it's a sort of an
movie is
infection
great.
breaks out. Again, not a slasher, more of a zombie adjacent movie. 76, this is a slasher. Alice, Sweet Alice. Great
Never
film.
seen that.
Iconic. Young Brooke Shields, the great yellow raincoat with the mask imagery. A very, very solid film that is a true blue slasher.
Okay.
And I don't want this, we're not going to get into this, but you can't not mention that throughout the 70s, you also have Argento.
Sure.
Just to mention
That's
what
the
else,
thing.
what else is happening at this time.
Right, we
Bird with the
mentioned
Crystal
that-
Plumage, 1970. Deep Red, 75. Suspiria, 77.
We mentioned that on the Griff on the Precinct 13 episode, right? Yeah,
Yes.
obviously that's a cousin to the slasher movie,
Right.
it's the Shallow movie.
So,
Yeah.
like, again, like those movies would have been playing. These are in the culture that then makes room for Halloween. But, like, these are all independent. These are independent films. These are made by people with whatever resources they have. And these 4 things I just want to quickly mention are not slashers at all. But the other big bang, the reason I start 1968, is Night of the Living Dead. That and Rosemary's Baby begin a 10-year trajectory that by 1978 allow Halloween to exist. Where it's just
in terms of how they're being made?
Just how they're being made, how they're being marketed, drive-in, double bills, grindhouse, exploitation. And then they just like play forever and make tens of millions of dollars. Blood Freak, 1972, is a movie about a guy who turns into a chicken.
Cool.
1972, Children Shouldn't Play with Dead Things. This is Bob Clark, who made Black Christmas.
Another all-time great title.
Kind of a zombie movie as well. The 1973, Messiah of Evil, which is a zombie movie made by Willard Hyuk and Gloria Katz, who then did Howard the Duck.
Right. And co-wrote
American Graffiti.
Right. Yes, they're Lucas people. Later, Messiah of Evil is just a totally low-budget, gnarly zombie film that I have a huge amount of affinity for. And this is where Halloween, this is what's important for Halloween, right? Like, I've always said this. I've said this since I was in film school.
He's always said this.
You've heard me say that. I said this about Verhoeven. I said this about Christopher Nolan.
All the way back to when you were in film school.
The history of independent film, right? If you look at the canon, they're like, here's independent film. You have Cassavetes. You have these things. And it's like, no, the history of independent film is these movies. Right. The history of independent film is some huckster being like, I can raise $100,000 from my community to make a movie at the carnival that we have, and we can make a horror movie at the carnival, and we'll make $1 million. That's the history of independent film. And everything I've just listed is proof of that to a T, as is ultimately Halloween, where it's like genre cinema, horror, exploitation, pornography, all of these things are independent film that they don't tell you are independent films, which is weird because everyone's like, Halloween, independent film.
Right, sure. But later they're like that. But right at the but like, but it's just like, guess what's playing this weekend? That movie you've heard about that's so scary. Like,
do you think part of that, Alex, is a framing of like, well, Halloween was independent film, but then Carpenter went on to do studio things, and the sequels were studios, and so it made good. Whereas they want to keep, like in film schools, right, the idea of American independent film as being this sort of like elite, classy thing.
Sure.
So it either has to lead to mainstream respectability, or it has to lead to like critical respectability.
It wouldn't behoove any film professor to be like, look, you're all going to make independent films, so I'm going to show you a bunch of 70s New York pornography and a bunch of horror films made by people who live in Knoxville, Tennessee. And I'm going to explain to you what $50,000 got you then, and what you would be chased out of town. Yeah, because that is not the official canon. But if you want to, like, when I was starting to discover these films, I was like, the use of negative space and maximizing your limitations in these films is so much more useful to me than watching Stranger Than Paradise. Sure, because these movies, like, they have nothing, and they're good. They are, and they're made on a shoestring. Like, you know, you have like Carnival of Souls, which I love, and like
one of my favorite movies.
Just like a movie that some guy made.
There's also a viable career path being presented versus like, or you can bet that you are the 1 in a million guy who becomes Jim Jarmusch. Yeah, because everyone comes out of film school being like, but I'm Jim Jarmusch, right?
But I mean, like, Carnival of Souls is one of those special things where you're like, well, what else did this guy make? And it's like,
not
he didn't
industrial
make anything
films,
else.
yes.
Right, yeah, exactly. He made instructional movies.
But as did Romero.
Right. But then, but like, it's like Carnival of Souls is so beautiful, and it has like one of the most incredible like edits I've ever seen. You know what I mean? And you're like, how did this guy?
But then the other side of that is a movie like Manos: The Hands of Fate, which like is famous a mystery science theater staple, where it's just like, not everybody who's like, I begged my dentist for 10 grand, and I begged my lawyer for 10 grand, and I'm going to make a horror picture. Not everybody can turn that into gold.
No. Sure.
But certainly a lot more people tried than anybody thinks.
But also, like, that movie has more of a life, even if it's only for being bad, than the indie drama equivalent of that.
Yes.
You know, even if it's only as an object of fascination, these shoestring movies do have a more viable life than any other genre produced on that sort of budget.
And because people who love the genre can look at them and see value in them. You can see some creativity because of how little you have. And there's so much of that in Halloween that we will soon be going over. But like, it's just, this is, so basically up until this point, this is what the genre is, right? This is a mainstream and independent sense of horror as a way of understanding when John Carpenter makes this movie about a guy who kills babysitters, how fucking revolutionary this thing can seem, because what you have is movies about rich people who are families dealing with Satan, or movies about people in weird ass rural locations being killed by zombies, mutated chickens, Leatherface, what have you, monsters.
It's terrible things happening to good, morally upstanding people, or it's dumb idiots make a series of bad mistakes and get what was coming to them.
Or like, you know, in the Messiah of Evil Shivers, it's like, or there's just like some sort of disease, Night of the Living Dead. Like, Night of the Living Dead obviously has so much influence in this way. But okay, so like now zeroing in, getting closer to Michael Myers. Okay, so your 4 slasher mountain.
You don't want to get too close to that guy. That guy
not that close.
Please. The knife's long.
So so there's another Mount Rushmore here, which is the slasher mascot Mount Rushmore, which I feel like is a Mount Rushmore Ben probably visits. Right? You've got your 4 guys on it. You've got Leatherface, 74, Michael Myers, 78, Jason, 80, and Freddy, 84. Right? Those are the 4. Yeah. Those are the guys.
Yeah.
The big 4.
Yeah, I don't know that there's anyone who can really challenge.
No, those are the 4.
But there's a little stone Chucky who's like running behind the mountain.
But Chucky, he's
little. He's little.
From slashing.
He's not making a joke.
I think Chucky works at the gift shop. I don't
think
think
Chucky works at the gift shop. Fine.
I don't think they put Chucky on the mountain.
I just want to say, let's not act like he's not a knife guy.
I'm not arguing for his inclusion. Halfway into his series, he's like, you know what? I mostly do bits.
But you know what?
I like him.
But you know who starts off doing bits is Freddy Krueger. He's like,
although he's less bit heavy in the first Nightmare.
Yes,
he's mostly just a scary kid.
Number 1.
Yes. Looking at these 4 franchises, of which Halloween is arguably one of the best.
Yeah, and is also the earliest franchise, right? Because the second Texas Chainsaw takes a while.
This is very important. So for the 4 above ground horror movies, and then for these to a different extent,
so this is the sequel
how much
section.
The legacy of these things is connected to what becomes of these franchises, right? So like, Rosemary's Baby has a made-for-TV movie. That's fine. But Rosemary's Baby is almost seen, and you can see this from the fact that it's the only one of those that no one has just like straight up remade.
Right.
It's almost seen as like, it's just one of those things you don't go back to.
They did the fucking NBC version a couple years ago that also everyone's like, we're just going to ignore this.
Yeah.
Right. So let's not talk about
it. It's one of those things like Jaws where it's just like Hollywood's just, you're just not going to do Rosemary's Baby.
Right. Yeah.
So Exorcist 2 comes out in 77. That's pretty soon.
Right.
Amityville 2 is 82. Now, this is a $12 million gross, 32 adjusted, down from 86.
So a huge dive. No one wanted to go back
and
to
Omen 2 is 78.
Right.
And so, like, David, you're talking like Amityville that has like a dodgy reputation. It's because that movie goes from like a B+ movie. I love Amityville 2. Everyone who loves horror,
Amityville 2 is a prequel, right? It's the one. It's about the original
and
murder.
it is made by an Italian filmmaker whose name is escaping me.
It's Damiano Damiani.
Yes, of course.
Sounds fake.
And it is.
I'm seeing, why Luigi? Wait a second.
It is a sick movie. Like, it is a sick movie.
I gotta say, it sounds kind of nasty.
It is a genuinely depraved movie, but it's the one that like horror fans are like, Amityville 2 is a masterpiece. But nobody in the mainstream.
But this is what I'm talking about, where you're like, okay, what about the Hellraisers? And they're like, everyone's like, well, we all know 5 and 6 were a huge rebound, and I'm like, we all do? Like, really?
We all know.
I have to watch 5 and 6 now?
We all know that Amityville 2 is beloved.
Right.
But like, it takes the franchise from like respectability straight into the grindhouse. Like, it is no longer a mainstream thing. It is now It is now filth.
Well, then I'm aware of Amityville 3 because it was 3D, like many a 3.
Yeah. And it's pretty fine. It has Meg Ryan in
it. But it also has the poster where it looks like a dinosaur hand is coming out of the house. And you're like, wait, what happened to this franchise?
It's like a goblin hand.
Don't you think also Amityville has a problem in that, like,
people keep moving into the same house, and you're like, come on.
Like, the realtor should warn people.
You heard about the horror?
Yeah. Have you seen this fucking movie?
It's impossible to not just think of the Simpsons thing with the murder house when Marge is selling real estate. But anyway,
my question was, so obviously the horror icon becomes crystallized later in sort of the Mount Rushmore that you established, right? But it does help that like Rosemary's Baby, Exorcist, and The Omen all have, at least, even if only in brief glimpses, some kind of physicalization of Satan, where you can, in theory, continue it and go like, I understand what the central fear is, whereas Amityville's a little more abstract, so you can make a sequel that pleases hardcore horror fans, but like passive viewers are just like, I don't know what the thing is anymore.
Yes.
You know?
For sure. Well, that's like, so Omen remains classy. Omen is like, Damien lives in the circles of society. Of
Right.
course, we all know Damien is evil.
That helps them, that they had like a physicalization that was
Exorcist
very
does the
clean.
same thing
3
with Reagan.
is the one with Sam Neill. in
Yes,
the
where
Omen?
he's like
where he's
the
like
president.
the president, or he's going to be the
Damien?
president or whatever.
Yeah, Damien
The
the
Omen
Omen
3.
3.
Okay.
And then Exorcist similarly tries to remain pretty classy for 2. 3 is, of course, Gonzo and great.
Right.
But Amityville just immediately becomes something closer to the independent films, right?
Sure.
Like
Right.
Amityville
It
does
just,
not try to...
like you say, just goes right into the trash.
Yes,
right.
instantly.
Yeah.
So like that's why those originals... that's why those are still like A-level films, and Amityville is an A-level film.
Right.
But like with slashers, they don't go from A to C+. They go from like B to B minus,
Right.
or from B to B plus even. So that's why like these 4 slasher things, like they become franchises with 7 or 8 movies, most of which are solid.
Texas Chainsaw is the one that's not
That's
quite
too Gonzo, yeah.
right, because all the sequels to that are weird.
Well, 3 is when New Line is like, we're gonna make Leatherface like
Right.
one of our slasher guys, like Freddy or Jason. And 3, I always was like, I love 3. I haven't seen it in years. I saw a print of it at Alamo a few years ago, and I was like, oh, this movie's not that good. I've always said this one was great.
And then 4 is the one with Renee Zellweger and Matthew
the
McConaughey.
new generation,
Right.
The next
Yeah,
generation.
And 2 feels a little like Gremlins 2, where
Yes,
it's just
very
like
much so.
a little
But it's
bit.
also like 12 years later.
That's the thing.
I have
It's
it
like they
written down
waited
somewhere.
too long. The director's sort of like, if I'm going to do this again, I'm not going to do the same movie again. And they made something a lot weirder that people didn't really,
Yes.
click
Okay,
with.
so like basically this is what I'm trying to say about sequels, and Halloween certainly pertains to this. Like you can make a great slasher and you can make a so-so sequel and it's fine. You can also make a so-so slasher and then make a good sequel, and you can then make 6 more.
Right.
And the other thing that has to be mentioned, 1978, is Dawn of the Dead, which is the first sequel that people are like, that's better. Like,
Sure.
That's just undeniably
Period.
better.
Right.
But it's also
he had more money. He improved on it. The sort of Evil Dead. It's
but that's,
many years
that's
later,
another reason that I
obviously,
wanted to talk about 68 to 78, because
Right.
it's sort of the night to dawn
Right.
era. But like, okay, so there's 2 modes you can work in here. And like something in Halloween, we'll talk about this, like Friday the 13th part 2 is like the one people think they remember.
Right.
In the way that there's stuff in Halloween, there's stuff not in Halloween that people think is in Halloween,
Because of the sequels?
just because of the legacy of the franchise.
Sure.
Yeah, and also, I mean, Halloween. Also, they mess with the TV cut of it.
Well, we'll talk about the TV cut. But like,
yeah.
so this is what's interesting about. So all of those
But with Friday the 13th, the first 3 movies are what people think of as
Yes.
the first movie.
But
Because they all are the same movie with improvements,
Yes.
and they're all doing the exact same format. Yeah.
But you see how those 4 Oscar-nominated films do not become viable franchises,
No,
and then all
sure,
4
right.
of these slasher mascots spawn these
Never-ending
rabid franchises. Because Friday the
franchises.
13th
Right.
Part 2 is quite solid.
Yeah.
Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 obviously has its fans, but there's no reason to make 8 Texas Chainsaw Massacre sequels. Obviously, it's been rebooted. Texas Chainsaw is a superior film to Friday the 13th,
Yeah.
but they nailed the sequel so hard that they could then go up to space.
I mean, Friday the 13th as well is like, that's a Paramount film.
Yeah.
That's a studio film. And that's the studio being like, wait a second, we could do one of these a year for nothing and make a ton of money.
Yes.
And they just make a little farmhouse on the set, like on the studio lot. And they tell like Sean Cunningham and what's his pants, like, just one a year.
Yeah.
And it's either the 4th or the 5th. I think it's the 5th where the producer is like, we fucking made a porno in the woods. Like, where he was like, really no one was paying attention to us at a certain point.
Jeez.
And there's sort of at that point, like the studio's like, wait a second, what is this shit? Like, but for a while it's
it becomes
profit.
this well-oiled machine that becomes a viable franchise. And like,
Yes.
but okay, so this is all to say, what does Halloween do differently than these films? Why is Halloween so different and special, even though it comes before Friday the 13th? And it, like, so we need to talk about that. But like, it's okay. The Final Girl, Black Christmas, a proto slasher. There's a lot of people in that movie. Olivia Hussey.
There's no final girl,
No.
right? Yeah.
Obviously,
there's no
this
main
is-
character, really.
Obviously,
Yeah.
this is one of the innovations that Halloween is credited with, even though it's in Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Sure.
There's
That's true.
Sally riding
Final
away,
shot, her face,
riding away at the end.
right?
But so you can't say that Halloween invented that. But what you can say is that none of these movies take place like on the suburban street
Right.
that everybody lives on. That everybody is like.
That's why this is the best movie ever made.
That's the thing here. Is that my point now that I've arrived at it is that everything we've talked about for this entire decade either is ignored for Halloween to innovate its own things, or Halloween plays with the things that have been done but does them better. now I'm basically ready to like talk about Carpenter.
David.
Yeah.
I've heard about The Shape.
You've heard about The Shape, the villain
But
of...
The Grid?
So The Shape, as we know, is how Michael Myers is billed in the Halloween film, the first one.
The Shape.
He's The Shape. You don't know where he's
mysterious.
Coming. Right.
Yeah.
Very mysterious. Now, what's this Grid? Is this also mysterious?
Well, The Shape, he's hidden under a mask, right?
Sure. Right.
He brings terror into our life. He's an unwelcomed visitor in our home. The Grid is quite the opposite, although is hidden perhaps under a mattress cover.
That's true. You can hide the Grid.
You can hide the Grid,
but
you want it in your home.
Well, right, because you're going to sleep cool and comfortable. Because we're talking about purple mattresses.
We're talking about purple mattresses, of course.
I don't know about you, Griff, but it's been a warm couple of weeks in New York City.
Yep.
And only purple mattresses have the Grid, which is a unique ventilated design that lets air flow through to help you sleep cool, even when it feels 1,000 degrees out. Now, to me, that's hyperbole. It didn't feel like 1,000 degrees, but it felt like 100 degrees, maybe.
999.
And the Grid is amazingly supportive for your back and your legs. It cushions your shoulders, neck, and hips, no matter how you sleep. Griff, I know you've got a bad back. I don't want to tell tales out of school.
No, that's a tale in school. I got a bad back. And I would say this mattress is even more supportive than Dr. Loomis.
Oh, well, yeah, that guy, that guy isn't exactly the most caring doctor I've ever met. I didn't meet him, but I've ever seen.
I don't know. He's pretty committed to his patients, if you look at it from that perspective.
Yes, he's definitely singularly focused. Look, much like Dr. Loomis, the Grid bounces back as you move and shift. I don't know if that's really like Dr. Loomis. Maybe he's actually... Dr. Loomis is kind of like memory foam. He remembers everything. But the Grid bounces back, right? So you don't have that I'm stuck feeling that you can get on a memory foam mattress where it sort of like makes an imprint and then you just sort of sink into it.
I mean, unfortunately, that makes the Grid kind of like Michael Myers because you think he's dead and then he bounces back every movie.
Well, he's the star. And the purple mattresses are the stars. Okay? It's this crazy squishy thing. Griff and I have both been sent this product. It's unlike any other mattress material I've ever felt.
It's fun to touch.
It is fun to touch, but if you're looking for something that's cooler and not as, sort of not like the memory foam thing where you just kind of get stuck in it, you can try your purple mattress risk-free with free shipping and returns, and financing is available too. I'm going to call to action, Griff. Do it. Purple is comfort reinvented. Right now, you get 10% off any order of $200 or more. Go to purple.com/check10 and use promo code check10. That's purple.com/check10, promo code check10 for 10% off any order of $200 or more. Purple.com/check10, promo code check10. Terms apply. And, they got mattresses, they got pillows, $200, and you're going to get 10% off. They got a bed frame, I think. It's pretty cool.
I've been idly working on this since April, what I just went through.
Yeah, we know. And you've been giving us updates. You've been sort of warning us.
Because occasionally
I'll
watch something else that will change something at some point I need to make.
Yes.
But also recently I've just been watching lots of Carpenter movies. But it is okay, obviously this is incredibly detailed and specific and the kind of deep dive into context that only certain people can wrap their heads around.
Some real nerdy shit.
But the thing about Halloween is that it's just a absurdly simple movie. And if you haven't seen it before, which somebody might be coming to it for the first time for this series, or if you haven't seen it in a while, it is almost impossible to watch it and be like, oh, I understand why this movie is I understand why this is still the slasher movie against which all others are measured. Because you look at it and you're like, this is just a good movie.
That's the way I saw it when I was 15. Is I watched it and I was like, that's good. That's the whole thing. I had no complaints about it, but I also was that sent seismic shockwaves across the industry.
The metaphor I'm going to make is it's kind of like when I feel like you would get into like punk and people are like, you got to check out Hawkwind, proto-punk. And then you listen to it and you're like, I don't know, it's okay.
Maybe I had to be there.
Yeah, I don't know, this is fine.
Yeah, sure, but it's right. It's like showing someone Casablanca and they're like, well, this is corny. They're saying all this corny stuff to each other. And I'm like, no. They no one was saying corny stuff yet, right? Or whatever. But anyway.
But it is the whole thing I was trying to wrap my head around for months, culminating in watching Halloween last night, is how can you possibly understand what a big deal this movie was?
Sure.
This movie that cost nothing. This movie that has no production value beyond its Steadicam and its music.
Right. Its big star is Donald Pleasance.
Yes. And like, how can you explain to somebody, even someone who loves the movie and loves Carpenter, this is the 10-year runway that this movie landed on. And now 40 years later, you can just copy Halloween and still make a pretty good movie. Why is that?
Right. There's a very small selection of movies where you could do a direct sequel 40 years later and have it feel that big.
Yes.
You know, like, not only is everyone still ripping off Halloween, but the idea of like, fuck, we're doing Halloween again.
But I think Alex's point is interesting and true, which is like, if I tomorrow was like, I'm going to make a movie called, Arbor Day, what's the plot? A guy kills some people.
Right.
He gets out of prison and he kills some people.
Yeah.
People would be like, I'm excited to see that.
Yes.
That's the kind of movie I like to see.
Yeah.
You know
What
what I mean?
sounds-
Like, there's just
trees? We cutting trees
forget it.
down?
It's called
Right.
fucking Tuesday. And it's like, well, this guy got out of prison and he's going to stab 8 people.
I mean, look, I like Tuesday. I think there's some potential there. But
Put it on the
Ben's
blank
onto
check picture
something
slate.
that
All right,
is
Ben's
here
not taking
too.
it to a tree
Arbor
zone.
Day. No, Arbor Day, it's like he's
You know what's
got
good
one of
about
those
Tuesdays,
fucking...
though? You have 6 sequels ready to go.
Right.
That's true. That's true.
Tuesday
You're
2,
saying
Wednesday.
Tuesday 3 Monday is the prequel.
yeah, right. Tuesday 0. Yeah.
No, but I like
Tuesday Origins.
I like
Monday.
Oh my god.
I like the Arbor Day idea where like
He's got like some garden shears or whatever.
no, he's got like in Gordon Green's Joe, they have that axe that's like filled with the acid that they use to like kill trees, and he's like an environmental activist who got like thrown in jail for chaining himself to a tree that was going to get bulldozed, and he comes out and he starts chopping people down.
But that's what I'm trying to say is you guys are putting gimmicks on it, which is fine, and people have done that.
You're saying you could
I'm
just
saying
do
I could
Tuesday.
just pitch Halloween to someone, and they'd be like, "Yeah, that's the kind of movie that still gets made,
Right.
and people still pay money to see."
And it's still viable. Well, that's the thing. Like, the thing about this that I love, right? Like, there are, I would say, many people, hundreds of thousands, I don't know, who every single Halloween will put on Halloween.
Sure.
Right? And you have to
Which was, of course, the idea behind calling it Halloween.
obviously,
Right.
and this has paid off for 40 years with now a $200 million sequel. But this is a genre where all of the films I listed, except for the Oscar-winning ones, right? Like, the canon of horror is shaped entirely by fans, right? Some of these movies had positive critical appraisal at the time. Certainly, there's your Pauline Kael, De Palma. But by and large, if a movie like Halloween becomes a classic, or Friday the 13th, it is because the fans are like, this is a classic.
Yes.
We are going to claim ownership of this from the people who made it. And we have decided canonically that this is one of the great films. And we, as a community of people who love the genre, are in control of film history for this genre in a way that, like, foreign film fans are not.
And horror
Art house film
conventions and graphic tees and
Of
all
course.
these things like
Fangoria and
right, but these are things that now kind of all at fandom at large resembles, and it's like the modern
But
Comic-Con
horror
is
is early,
so much
right.
more indebted to horror cons than it is to what Comic-Con used to be, which was a place to buy comic
Yes,
books.
it's hand in hand with sci-fi in that
Right,
way,
right.
which is a subculture that consumes and owns its thing. The difference
Yeah.
is it's cheaper and easier to make,
And
so
I think
it's
there-
more accessible.
I think there's that
Right.
horror thing too that is unique within the genre of just like people getting elevated to being legendary status.
yes.
You know, where it's like you are a megastar within this bubble.
But also right, that totally weird thing is like, who's that 6'8" guy who looks like he had a stroke? And it's
Right.
like, that guy's Leatherface in the third
Right.
Leatherface.
But
Like,
also
what
sometimes
are you
they're
fucking
like,
talking about?
don't you know who that guy is? He played the cop in 4 disparate horror movies who
Right.
doesn't catch the guy in time.
But this is the thing, like, people who love that and will line up for an autograph,
Yes.
like, these are the people, of which I am one. Like, no one who loves the movies, the horror movies, has not seen Halloween. But they
Right.
can watch it
Right.
every 12 months.
Yeah.
So then it becomes this question of, why watch something that you know forwards and backwards?
Sure.
Why have I watched Star Wars every day I've been 6 since I was 13 years old?
Sure.
Why, like, that's my first thing I do when I'm, so why watch something? But it's not a mythology. It's just designed to titillate teenagers for
Yeah.
one night
Right.
of sex and violence. Why watch these movies 50 times? And that's the sort of like consumer swallowing the product that horror is, and like
Sure.
they just, it's not about it. As I was saying earlier, it is, I need to see everything. I need to watch it all, but it's also like, I just also need to, on a loop, be rewatching everything else. So like there is, you could screen Halloween or The Thing or these Carpenter movies, it'll be sold out.
Yeah.
People will always line up to just experience these perfectly made films.
You and I went to see Guns N' Roses in concert in New Jersey the other night.
First concert in 17 months.
I mean, I was doing the math on it. It's my first concert I've gone to in at least 4 years, I think.
Oh, wow.
That's a long time.
I believe.
Well, it set the bar very high.
Yeah, I don't go to concerts very often. I don't like standing.
Well, we had seats.
Thank God. Thank God. But we had a long conversation in the car ride back, and you were sort of comparing the horror community to Kiss.
Heavy to metal and rock.
Sure,
really,
but you were using Kiss as sort of like a perfect distillation of The Thing.
Yes.
Where it's just like this bizarre feedback loop between the fans and the band that have always been successful but have never been respected as high art. They've never been canonized as one of like the cool groups. There's like a rabid sort of hunger for consuming this stuff over and over again, repackaging it, revisiting it, merchandising it out the wazoo.
Much like horror,
Right.
something like Halloween, a band like that could say to their fans, what do you want to buy? And
Right.
they would say, what do you have?
Anything.
Right.
If it can say, as Gene Simmons says, if it can say Kiss on it, it should
Right.
say Kiss on it. If it can say Halloween on it, it will say Halloween on it.
I just think it's interesting.
And they can be
Yeah.
in the Library of Congress
Yeah.
or the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, but it doesn't mean that John Carpenter is going to get an honorary Oscar.
Right.
Or that people are going to be like, legitimately, as cinema, as we like to protect it, we're letting this one in. They can
Sure.
be like, yeah, that's a great slasher, which is a genre of horror.
Right.
Is
But
John Carpenter going to get an honorary? I feel
that
like
would
he
be
will.
cool. He could.
Should
I feel like
fucking
he probably
happen.
will.
Yeah. Especially now that they do like
that is
6
a-
a year,
Yeah, I
they
feel
should
like
give
they're,
him one.
and also it's just like they're starting to branch
I
into
bet-
stuff.
Yeah.
Like
He's on a long list.
right.
Yeah.
But that would be insane. As someone
It
who
would
was just like,
it would represent the grand arc of these things.
Right.
it certainly would.
Right.
Peel
that
getting
happens,
a
let's
screenplay
point out
Oscar
that we-
kind of comes from, it feels like some full circle moment of
Yeah,
like,
right,
we
right.
should
Get
go
out,
back.
having a
and
seal of
fucking-
legitimacy to
right.
it
That
or
is,
whatever.
well,
but-
yeah, it's a movie that just quotes Halloween.
Right. That's what I'm
constantly.
saying. Like, it feels like them being like, fuck, we should pay some respect to John.
Well, it's just one of those things where you can look back at 1978 and be like, yeah, like the score of this, like Halloween should have won an Oscar for score. I don't know what won in
Right.
70, or should have been nominated
Right.
at least.
I think you see the thing is, I checked my best score 1979.
I hope you checked it to put Halloween on it.
No, Halloween was on it.
Oh, good,
I was
good.
checking my ballot, and I saw it's not the winner. I have Days of Heaven, Ennio Morricone's famous score.
For any of the listeners who don't know, David has a how far back does it go?
Goes back to 1928.
Oh my god.
David has a spreadsheet in 1928 what he would give the Oscar to in every category and what the 5 nominees would be.
And some people think like, oh, it's just the main. No, I got original score there. But is that wrong? I have to now. And I was sort of shaken because I was like, obviously, I must have Carpenter winning score here, and I don't. Days of Heaven, obviously,
I can't picture it right now.
it's a
and I've
tremendous
seen
score.
the
But
movie.
Oh,
you
I
can't-
could sing all of it.
I mean, but like,
I could sing. I could book a venue. I could go to Carnegie Hall and sing all of the Days of Heaven score.
I mean, the Halloween theme obviously
Well,
is
once
designed to stick
all
in your head.
COVID problems are gone, that can be a Patreon bonus tier.
That'll be a Patreon
this
tier.
is
Griffin Newman one night at Carnegie Hall singing the Days of Heaven score live to the film.
That'll be great.
Wordless Music Orchestra presents Griffin Newman's.
But I mean, this is also the year of John Williams' Superman score.
See, that's a good score.
A great score.
Good score.
Also, his score
Yeah.
for The Fury, which is a great score.
Yeah.
There's a lot of good scores.
But you're exactly this is what we were saying in the car when we were trying to find a tunnel back from New Jersey to New York. Fruitlessly, is like the sort of disreputability.
Right.
That's not a word. What's the word I'm looking for?
I don't know. Keep going.
The disreputable nature of things like rock and roll or heavy metal or horror.
Right.
And then the sort of 50-year arc of these, or 40 or 30-year arc of bands that are regarded like punk metal bands, loud, vulgar trash, as these movies all could have been. And then 40 years later, it's like, Well, Iron Maiden sell out 2 shows at Barclays Center every 2 years. That's 70,000 people buying a ticket to a band that has never had a mainstream crossover. And it's like, and Halloween, you can reboot it and it makes $200 million, or you can repackage and people will buy the new Blu-ray, the new box set. Like, these fans, they belong to the things they love, and the things they love belong to them. But also, and this 90 minutes is just like this perfect object.
But also that they create industries in this certain way where you're like, maybe I'm speaking out of my ass here, but like, graphic tees of things from pop culture are things that children wear to bed, right?
Sure.
I do feel like adults wearing TV shows of the T-shirts of the media they like is a thing that really gets pushed through by horror fans.
Griffin is wearing a Orco T-shirt.
I'm wearing an Orco T-shirt.
And I'm wearing
Halloween Horror-thon.
And I'm wearing
a Hello Fennel shirt.
Yeah.
But do we recognize this guy talking about sequels?
Let me see. Turn to me.
Is the creature from the Black Lagoon.
No. This is one of the Halloween costumes from Halloween 3 season of the
Oh, it is, of course.
Yes.
Shit, that's right.
Wow.
To be fair, it looks a little like the creature from the Black Lagoon.
No, it doesn't. David's stupid. I get the point.
Creature from the Black Lagoon.
I think he's green.
Well, he's green.
Yeah, green guy, red eyes.
Well, so is Oscar the Grouch.
He doesn't have red eyes.
Well, I started saying this before you said the red eyes.
He doesn't have a hood on, but
conventions based around appearances, right, is a thing that really formulates from the horror community, and the demand of we want to meet these people who otherwise would never be recognized in their grocery store. We'll now line up for hours to meet them for $5
$40 autographs.
Right.
The Kane Hodder-ification of
not just the Fangoria existed, but that modern fan journalism, if we can call it that, is closer in tone to Fangoria than things like Variety and Hollywood Reporter.
Absolutely.
Right? And even the tone of shit like Deadline or whatever is closer to Fangoria, I feel like, by and large. Then you're also looking at shit like the endless re-releases, repackagings of home video releases.
Well, there's a very important that's going to be my transition into Carpenter.
Yes.
Carpenter's career. Obviously, this is his 3rd film. This is 1978.
Yeah.
Ghost of Mars, his penultimate film, is 2001. Right?
Sure.
This is with no quotation marks. This is the era of VHS. The first VHSs are made and marketed from Hollywood Movies in 1978 from Fox and Paramount. 2001, I think, is the first year that DVD sales overtake VHS.
It's pretty
sales.
right. That's when your
Carpenter's career,
mainstream people everyone's starting to buy a DVD.
Carpenter's career lines up in a Venn diagram. It's just inside the circle.
That's fascinating.
Of the VHS era. Right. And he's
the guy whose legacy is really formalized by VHS.
Yes. Every one of his films, whether you have a Halloween clamshell, like if you're a horror fan, having the Carpenter collection on your shelf, these are just beautiful tapes of great films that the aesthetics, while obviously made for theatrical distribution, are intrinsically linked to home video.
You made a point of rewatching this on VHS.
I've had
this episode.
Halloween VHS I've had for over 20 years.
And then today you took or posted a photo of your baby daughter holding the VHS.
She grabbed it off the table when I was feeding the cats, and I came back and she just had my Halloween tape in her hands. Her grabby little hands. But
was that the moment you truly became a father for the first time, that you felt the pride?
It could have been. It'd be too bad if I waited 8 months for that. But no, I was very proud. She was close enough to the coffee table in a chair. She was restrained, and came back from feeding the cats, and she had my Halloween tape in her hands. It was very exciting. But like, this is what you're saying. Carpenter became emblematic of owning your filmmaker, because he came out right when you could do that.
Sure.
And then made movies that are lean, mean, 90-minute films that you want to rewatch all the time. And you would like to own them because they have beautiful artwork, beautiful posters, beautiful iconography. Right. And you want to have these films in your collection, but not in the way you want to have the Star Wars trilogy. It's much more of a personal thing. It's not like everybody owns Superman on VHS.
Yeah.
Everybody owns MASH on VHS. It's like, oh, not everybody owns The Thing on VHS.
Dave and I are obsessed with physical media.
We are, but I abandoned VHS.
Well, that's a problem. I've been trying to get you back to it for years.
I can't have. There's no space for these fucking things. Go on, Griff. Go on.
Well, do what I do.
Years,
live in
I've
an
been
apartment that
telling
is just stacks of things on the floor that I don't know how to organize.
I've been telling David for years he needs to get a VCR. I told him I would get him one as a wedding present. I told him I'd get him one as a baby shower present.
Yeah.
He won't let me buy him a VCR.
I do think I've started circling back around. Not that I need a fucking excuse for another collection, but there's certainly VHSs I held on to for a very long time, right? Certain key movies, but then also things that for a long time weren't released on DVD. And even when they finally came out, I stopped like pawning off my old VHSs and started circling back to certain things because there are movies that... They're movies where you have a nostalgic association to them in that format because that's how you saw it. And even though it's not the proper presentation of that movie, it hits some spot,
That's
right?
why I'm watching a widescreen movie like Halloween on VHS for the 10th time.
But then there are genres that sometimes are actually weirdly, if not benefited from that format, gain some sort of adjacent parallel power in that format.
Absolutely.
That it almost works as like a different cut of the film. It's smoothing over edges. It's abstracting things in a way that certainly helps with horror movies being produced on a budget, but also things where you're dealing with like patches of darkness, you know?
And there are plenty of those in this movie.
Yeah.
It's a dark movie.
It's a dark movie.
Their joke is that they couldn't afford lights, but
they also couldn't afford extras, which is one of these many things that makes many of the scenes in this movie just staggeringly weird.
Yeah.
Right.
And very, very off-putting in an entirely unnatural way in a purely mundane environment.
Absolutely.
There are... I counted this when I wrote this down because when David and I went for a dad walk recently, I was like, I have all this stuff I want to talk about.
Thank you.
Context, background, and you were like, well, that's fine because what is there to say about Halloween? We like the movie itself, and I was like, no, we're talking about.
And we didn't know you're characterized. I did not say that. This is also like one of my favorite movies ever, and I haven't even talked about my experience with Halloween.
I want to hear it, and about Carpenter, but I want to say one thing first. There are
go ahead.
5 sequences in this movie.
Okay.
4 of which are short, and then 1 of which is 45 minutes long.
Right.
That's the construction.
The back half is
that's the construction. This movie is prologue. Loomis at the hospital,
right?
A bit of context in Haddonfield at school, Loomis coming into Haddonfield, and the girls going after school. Then it's nighttime, 40 minutes in, and then that's the rest of the movie is a straight line.
Connected
so
together,
there are
basically.
5 sequences.
I will say this. I was terrified of this movie before I saw it. This was the scariest thing in the world to me. I knew what it was about. I knew it was about a guy called Michael Myers who went around and stabbed people. When I learned this when I was like 10 or whatever, I had never heard anything so scary in my entire life.
Yeah, because I was such a big scaredy cat, and I was such a big video store kid, and I would look at these VHX boxes that would like terrify me, and the concepts would terrify me. If I come on TV, they'd terrify me. I don't remember ever being scared of Michael Myers in that way.
But you lived downtown.
You did
That's
live downtown.
true.
I lived in a house in a cul-de-sac.
I didn't live in the
and
south.
I was similarly terrified.
But I just remember being like, Jason is scary, Freddy's scary,
well, Jason
Chucky's
takes
scary.
Manhattan, where you live.
Right. That's
He
that was
did
the
take
scariest.
He did take it.
Yeah.
Well, but Jason and Freddy are more superficially scary looking, I suppose.
But looking at things like Basket Case and Creepshow and whatever, I'm just like, these are like grotesque. They're horrifying.
Right, but those
this thing came to life. Whatever.
I would get that they were scary.
Yeah.
Basket Case, so good. But then
Basket Case right around the corner from where you grew up.
Yeah.
Such a good
right on 6th Avenue is where
Too
part
scary.
of the movie takes place.
Too scary.
But I'm not scared of Freddy in the same way because I don't think anyone's invading my dreams. I'm not going to any...
Oh, that's my ultimate fear because I love sleeping. And if someone fucking dares mess with that, they're on my shit list.
I'm not scared of Jason. I'm not going to a summer camp anytime soon when I'm 10 years. I do go to
the lake where you refused to throw Ben's jeans off the dock.
That's true.
Okay, for one, that's the ocean.
You're not scared,
for
Chucky?
2, I wasn't. Anyway, but no,
I'm scared Chucky because if toys could murder people, I'm fucking dead in a second.
I had genuine problems.
Yeah.
Like, not genuine, but like I would get scared because once I learned of the concept of, there's like a serial killer. What's that? It's like a person who goes around killing people for
Michael
no
Myers
real
is
reason.
just tapping into that for you.
It's probably the first time I'm hearing about it in a significant way.
Okay.
When was this? What year?
I think I'm like 9 or 10 years old, something like that.
But so was this before or after you would have seen Scream, which is a first horror movie for a lot of people?
I had not seen Scream. Okay. I think I was aware of Scream. This is before Scream, and then I became aware of Scream. But I thought Scream was like a comedy. Mm-hmm. And Scream is such an MTV movie.
Oh, it's very meta and it's very.
But I didn't see. Probably didn't see.
I'm just
Scream
saying.
until a couple
you
years
guys
later.
talked about this once when Scream came up. It's like there hadn't been a horror movie released in theaters like that for 7 years.
Right. Yeah.
So a lot of people, that was the first time they sat in a theater and watched a slasher movie.
But this is interesting. Like there's a crystallization of your understanding of serial killers existing as a thing,
a guy,
right?
Like,
and also
with a name
that you could make a movie with that structure,
right?
Both are tied to Michael Myers. Like he becomes the face of that entire concept for you across reality and art.
And then I see the movie, I don't know, as a teenager. I don't know when I saw it for the first time, but it was on television. But by that point, I'm a cinephile, a budding cinephile.
Wow.
Sitting there with your beret and your cigarette holder.
While he's on the boards.
I'm already appreciating. And then there's a...
Yes.
I don't know if I should tell this story.
Say it.
Do it.
There's a moment sometime in my teenagehood where I'm extolling Halloween to somebody, a couple friends, English people.
While you were on vacation, yes.
Right.
Unfortunately,
weird use of a holiday. Just show up in a foreign city, yell at
describing the scene.
A movie you like.
I'm describing, I think, the scene where Loomis and the sheriff are like in the Myers home, and they're poking around, and then like the window, something falls through the window,
gutter or something. I
think it is a gutter.
Yeah.
And it's a good jump, and it's obviously there's nothing to it, right? Great moment. And I think I described the scene loudly. I think I just described it as a pipe coming through the window. And for years, my friends would repeat me saying, like, crash, a pipe goes through the window, which I don't think I ever said. I think they puffed it up in their
became a
heads.
Play It Again, Sam.
Exactly.
You like me, you really like me.
If the two people who know what I'm talking about are listening, they know what they know.
They would tease
know
you by
this.
screaming crash a pipe.
All the time. If I ever got excited about anything ever again in any context where I would become more animated, which
is very
I
useful
do,
because I feel like you get animated a lot.
That's why I was afraid to say it on mic.
Oh well, it's part of the glossary now. It's in the lexicon.
Exactly.
Baby.
And so I don't know why I'm bringing this back into my life, but
and I want Ben to offer some of his. Ben's holding a Carpenter book.
Yeah.
But I want to just quickly say I cannot remember for the life of me exactly when this was, but there was 2 consecutive weekends when I was like 12 where I saw, it must have been the Sci-Fi Channel. One Friday showed all the Halloween movies, and I was at like, maybe I was 11, and at like 7 or 8 o'clock, I was like, well, I'll watch this. And the next thing I know, it's 7 in the morning and I can't sleep. And I'm terrified. And the next week, they did Friday the 13th. And I just remember these marathons. And then, but Halloween, similarly, I was like, well, I'm not at a lake. And I don't have any reason for Jason to come after me.
You mean Friday the 13th? Yes. Yeah.
However, I do have this fear that some guy might just walk into this house and stab me with a knife because really the street looks not unlike my own.
Right. I didn't live in the suburbs, but I still, I did, I lived on a quiet street in London.
In New York City. Oh.
But I swear to God.
And put down that knife.
I do think that's the brilliance of this movie. Is right. It's like the and I've said this. I think I've said this on this podcast before. But right, like the suburbs feel so safe. Obviously, that's how they're designed.
Well, see, it's funny. I think of the suburbs as being very terrifying, but I wonder if it's only because of horror movies.
Because they're quiet as well. But the suburbs are supposed to feel safe,
yes,
right? They're supposed to be the place,
sure.
Where you're like, well, of course my kids can run around here. But then it's of course of like, well, if a guy with a knife wanted to kill you, all he has to do is like open one door.
Right.
No one locks their door.
No, this is why I find them scary. Whereas like I look at slasher movies like as a kid and I'm like, well, I live on the 11th floor. I'm golden.
This guy's not getting to me.
Right.
But one of the most brilliant moments in this movie is when she's hammering on the guy on the door and the light comes on and then nothing else happens and then she has to go to the next house. I mean, it's so good and it's so unspoken. No one's fucking helping you out there.
No, I am realizing
that fear
this is
really
why
gripped me watching this movie for the first time and many other times. Like that's what's so magical about it. And then you look out your window and you're just like, as they look out the window in this movie 15 times.
Sure.
And it's just like, there's nobody out there.
I am realizing this is why I think I'm so much more scared by supernatural shit.
Another scary thing that's in this movie is just getting stuck into like boring conversations with people that live in the town with you. God, that is another part of the suburbs that is the worst.
Keystone to many a horror film, of course, is right. That early scene where it's like
bad
dialogue.
Talk.
Right.
Yeah. Ugh.
Creek. Just kidding. It's not an ad read. Sorry. It's me, Alex, cutting in to my own contextful episode with one crucial thing that I forgot. I had it written down. I can't believe that I forgot to talk about this. I lost sleep later that night because I knew that the explanation of this movie and this time period was not complete without something incredibly crucial. Okay, going to be very fast. As I've been saying, 1968 to 1978 is the period I am discussing here as a way of understanding how and why John Carpenter's Halloween landed with the impact that it did when it came out in 1978. The biggest thing I forgot to mention is that 1968 to 1969, Zodiac Killer starts murdering. 1969, Charles Manson. 1972 to 1978, John Wayne Gacy. 1973, the beginning of the Golden State Killer. 76 and 77, David Berkowitz, the son of Sam. And starting in 1978, Jeffrey Dahmer. These 10 years that I'm trying to explain as being the period of American history into which Halloween is born cannot be properly understood in terms of people's hunger or appetite for slasher films, horror, whatever you want to call it, without first understanding the overwhelming rise in crime, serial killers, serial murders, random killings, and other associated fear that crept into the country at this time. This is where slashers come from. This is why movies like Halloween are separate from all the other horror movies I have been talking about that came out prior to 1978. Okay, back to the episode. Ben, what do you have in that book there? Do you have some Carpenter Halloween stuff?
I just have it as we're going to go through. I'll throw out some facts.
We can talk about all five.
I think we should talk
sequences.
about maybe Deborah Hill's involvement. Yes. She's come up a little bit here
very
and there.
Interesting and very important, I think, too. She goes hand in hand with Dean Cundy, I think, for this film.
Big influence.
Looking up both of their filmographies is undeniable that she brings Cundy to Carpenter. Because she works with him before... She works with Dean Cundy on earlier films that she's involved with. Yes. So his career is in progress. Her career is in progress. And then she kind of brings him over.
He worked
on, it was 1977, Satan's Cheerleaders, which is a good movie. And also 1977, Charge of the Model Ts, which stars Troy McClure, of course. And Dean Cundy shot both of those movies. He didn't shoot Assault on Precinct 13. And then suddenly he's Carpenter's guy. Clearly when you have to assume like, this guy's magic. Right. Like there's something he's doing here that we need to bring over. And she also clearly is like in the scripting, the Laurie Strode is obviously, as has been historically noted, a character she was very connected to and gave her hometown the name of Laurie Strode's hometown. Mm-hmm. She's obviously very instrumental in shaping both the story and the craft of this movie.
Some things from our dossier. I'm just looking at this to spice in, right? You know, like they also just came up with scares. Before they even had, obviously
they were
know
should be a scare every 10 minutes. We want this to be structured like a radio serial.
But like Deborah Hill has the idea of like, what if your boyfriend went downstairs, came up with the sheet over him, but then it's not your boyfriend anymore, and they're like, great, that's got to be in the movie, right? Like things like that. Like they're coming up with the ideas first, and they're like, don't worry, we'll build a plot around.
That is
this.
Michael's one bit.
It's a good bit.
It's funny.
Great.
I find
it
very funny.
What makes it a real.
Well, the glasses, and then he cuts the eye holes in the sheet, which you don't see him doing.
Yeah, but he loves eye holes. We know from the first shot, this guy is fucking obsessed with eye holes. But he's got a mask.
But you don't see him do it. I would like to see him.
You'd like to see him just delicately like.
Well, it's not easy. It's not easy.
No.
And they're very symmetrical, and they're the same size.
They always do line up because like sometimes it's like uneven or they're too far apart.
Or one is big and one is small.
The way Hill puts it is she wrote the first draft and it was mostly the teenagers and Carpenter comes in and layers in the Loomis stuff,
right,
which makes a lot of sense.
Yep,
because Carpenter's the one with the truly deathly outlook on things. Like and they say this about Escape from New York, right, where he's like, again, like he writes this really bleak script and Nick Castle comes in and is like, it should be funnier.
Yeah,
this is the best thing about him. Rewatching now as I've done.
And he's fine to collaborate on.
Like a dozen of his movies leading up to this and just wanting to be refreshed for the series is like, he just has the most horrible outlook on humanity.
There should be a character walking around being like, pure evil suffuses this man.
And it's like, is that character depicted as crazy? It's like, actually, at the end, we prove him right.
Right. He's always correct.
He's spot on. And then it's in those other movies, it's like, so what happens at the end? It's like, oh, all hell breaks loose. And then the credits roll. Right. I just love his nihilism. It's totally refreshing and so not it's just not comforting, and yet these movies are comfort movies for people who love horror.
I know we're still in the early days, but I know of much of what's to come. It is just kind of incredible how committed he is to these abrupt endings where it's just like
end of story, end of movie, because he's like a 40s and 50s guy.
Right. He's the Howard Hawks thing. It's like, what more is there to do? We don't need a button here.
Right. Like the story's over, and I guess what's next with the credits? Like, do we want to have the characters wrap it up? No. Like,
there's like nothing cute that ever happens at the end of a Carpenter movie. It's always some note of like lingering bleakness or anger or like a final spit in the face. Or a kind of shrug of like, I don't know, we're all fucked.
That's the thing. They live a little bit. Like you see it in a lot of his movies. It's just so great.
Yeah.
Movies that don't have sequels.
Right.
That it's just, he's just so miserable in his outlook.
But even, like, not to jump ahead, but the fact that he did not intend for this movie to have a sequel ever, and that the ending is the body disappearing and the guy being like, well, yeah, I mean, of course.
Can't kill the boogeyman. Well, yeah, like, evil, hey, kids, whatever. The boogeyman is still out there. Maybe he's coming to you. Maybe he's coming for you next.
Yeah.
Also, because this movie has no justification for what Michael Myers is doing.
It's huge.
This does not have the sibling pursuit. This is one of those things I was saying, like Friday the 13th, people put that in their memory of this movie.
Right.
But it is not in this movie that him and Laurie Strode are related.
Right.
But it's something that you put there, and at the end of the movie, it's like, no, there's just a boogeyman out there.
There's a quote from Carpenter here that I really love about what we're talking about that I want to read, which is that when they were shooting the final shot, which I love. And the shot of Pleasance's face.
Yes.
Pleasance was like, I knew this was going to happen. And I can give you, I can't believe this happened.
Right.
And Carpenter was like, well, I definitely knew that it was probably going to be. I knew this was going to happen. But he gave me both. And he left the decision in my hands, which is the mark of a great actor. That's Carpenter's opinion, where he's like, Pleasance is just like a guy who's like, I'm an actor.
Sure.
I can give you any face you need. You'll figure it out later, right? Like, he's not like, no, Loomis would definitely only do this. Like, he's a Swiss Army
That's
knife.
a good Pleasance.
Yeah. It is good.
I love Donald Pleasance. Donald Pleasance is the fucking best.
Now I feel bad. My impression at the beginning
he's one of the most prominent people for me that it's like, for 15 years, I was like, it's the guy from Halloween. Yeah. And then I was like, oh, he was a massively famous and successful actor before. But for me, just forever and ever.
Well, he's also in so many Halloweens as well. And I did just watch them all. And he's in, conservatively 6 of them?
Well, he's not in 3.
He's not in 3, so I guess he's in 5.
He's in 1, 2, 4, 5, and 6.
And then you've got McDowell, given his spin in the zombies.
But he's not in. He's up through 6. He's not
up
in
through
H2O.
6. 6 is the one where he's really on his last legs.
But there's something. I mean, I think you said this. I don't remember if you said it on mic or you said before we were recording. But that his first choice was Peter Cushing and his second choice was Christopher Lee.
Both obvious.
He wanted a Hammer
legends,
guy,
right? Yep.
But aside from the baggage, the associations of them, they're also guys who look like they belong in horror movies, right? Like
certainly by 78, they've been in horror movies for 25 years.
But you're also just a face,
right? The bone structure on both of those guys, the
Cushing
voices
looks
on
like
both
a
of them.
skeleton man,
right?
Who's like wearing a little bit of skin just to convince you he's not a skeleton man, right? And Christopher Lee, he's
got this long, elegant face and these very sort of intense eyes and whatever. Like you put them in a horror movie, they feel like they belong. There's something about Pleasance who feels like, despite the fact that this character becomes so big for him and he does other horror movies and other Carpenter movies and whatever, that he doesn't totally feel like he belongs in this world without also feeling like, oh shit, this is weird that Alec Guinness is in Star Wars, you know? Where it's a clear, like, I am gifting you the prestige. It's instead just like, this is like a real guy. This is just like an adult man who is now caught up in this horrible thing.
Well, also because if Peter Cushing had been in it when I saw it, I would have been like, that guy's in Star Wars.
Tarkin.
Whereas when I saw this,
a year after Star Wars.
When I saw this, all I thought was, that's Dr. Loomis.
Right.
And the development of this is so, that's a whole other thing you could talk about.
Well,
but like,
Pleasance decides to be in the movie because his daughter liked the score for Escape from New York, which is wild.
Or from Assault on Precinct 13.
Assault on Precinct 13, not right now. Escape from New York.
The budget for
his
this movie,
time-traveling daughter.
Yeah. The budget for this movie was $300,000. He got paid $25,000.
Pretty good.
It's like, right. And 50% of the budget is the cameras and the lenses.
Right.
In a lot of my reading, I feel like in this like independent phase of his career, it's just been really wild to just like kind of get like more a glimpse into just like how random weird rich people would just pay for these things.
Sure.
And it's just like
some weird guy.
And like,
this
and
guy
he read the script. And like, what does he know? But he's like, all right, I don't know. Here's $300,000.
Well, also, he was the anecdote I read somewhere was that he was pitching the movie to Akkad, and Akkad was filming
Mustafa Akkad, one of the all-time names.
We'll get back to him.
Yeah,
but
the message.
Akkad, right, was doing this big epic.
Yeah.
And Carpenter was like, I think I could do this for $300,000. And Akkad, like, took a moment and went, the movie I'm making right now costs $300,000 a day, and it is driving me crazy. Right. If this guy thinks he can actually get the whole thing done in that amount of time, I'm willing to take a flyer on that. It's like,
can teenagers die in it? Yeah, okay, then you can have...
Right, fine.
And Carpenter's not even like, I have to make this movie. He's just like, I really want to keep making movies.
Right.
This is the level someone's going to let me work at right now.
Carpenter's like also pitching to him as a business proposition where he's sort of, I don't think giving the full Alex Ross Perry manifesto, but sort of saying like, here's what's been going, here's what's been working, I could work off of this, this is why I don't need many locations, why I don't need many actors, like... all this sort of stuff. And he goes like, fine, yeah, why not? Who knows? Who cares? Like, and I think by his own admission was just sort of like, this is a flyer, who gives a shit? And then once this movie hit big, he was like, I am keeping my fingers around this franchise forever.
I'm glad I didn't let this guy own any of this stuff. I just gave him no money to create.
Right. And like Akkad's son is still like, I know there's still weird shit with like, it's a lot easier to make merchandise of the Halloween sequels than of the original film.
But via Akkad, Akkad dies in a terrorist attack. But his son is now in charge of the movies, and he was the one who greenlit the zombies,
right?
And then now the Gordon Greens,
right? Because the sequels had studio participation, I think he has less complete control. Whereas anything that's rooted in the first movie, it's like cannot happen without Akkad's son giving the thumbs up.
But also, these people love money.
Yes, that's the other thing.
They've been minting money off of this for
people
40
who make
years.
movies. Yeah.
Right, because they're all fucking like NECA Toys, which is the action figure company that makes a lot of horror movie stuff, has been producing like a ton of like Halloween 3, Halloween 2, and everyone's like, why can't you make Halloween 1? And they're like, Halloween 1 costs like 8 times as much as Halloween 2.
I had the McFarlane Toys Michael Myers.
Merchandise Spotlight, I'll get back to that later.
I had that. But everything from David, you know I love when you narrate a poster. Could you narrate the Halloween poster for me, please?
Wait, and not the Halloween poster for Tyler Perry's.
We'll do that later.
Yeah, we'll do that.
We'll do that after we do the box office game for that as well.
Patreon series. Why would you give that up?
Just narrate this poster for me.
Yeah,
I almost did a bit though where I was like, "We're not here to talk Halloween." The Halloween,
once again, save that for Patreon.
Halloween poster, very simple. A great poster.
And is there a tagline on this poster?
Narrate it, David.
Top of the poster, Halloween.
Already, I'm interested.
It's a great holiday we all love.
And of course, part of the pitch, for this movie also was like, wait, no one's ever called a movie Halloween?
I was going to say,
them sort of like going through the archive.
I know I've called out several horror films in this episode already as having some of the best titles of all time. Halloween might have the smartest title of all time.
That and Psycho. I mean, it's hard to...
Halloween's just so fucking good, though. It's just like...
And it's in the font. The font that like you can still market a movie on.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
the image here below the title, and I also have the titles Big H, Big N. You know, I like this sort of, that's fun.
Great.
A man's hand is dragged.
What color is the font?
It's white and orange.
Like a jack-o'-lantern.
Sure. Man's hand dragging the knife across, right? You got this sort of 5 knife kind of like image there, right? But of course, that also looks like a pumpkin. And then the pumpkin's got scary eyes.
They do.
Like a jack-o'-lantern.
Right. And then the tagline, the night, he,
now,
in italics.
Now, wait a minute.
Wait a second.
Came home.
And now, wait a minute. I have 10 questions.
There's no further answers.
Who